we've had an executive session, now we're gonna reconvene our meeting and, open the meeting with the Pledge of Allegiance. If everyone can stand and join us, please.
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. First order of business for us tonight is public comments. Do you have anybody that would like to make any public comments this evening?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
There's a group of us who would like to talk on a particular matter.
Can you give me Lieutenant, you want to?
Okay.
I wrote it down on the paper. Al, wouldn't he, Maynard?
Okay.
Can you go to the mic?
Oh, podium, sure. I'm not the only one here who would like to talk on this subject matter.
Okay.
It involves the streets in Maynard, specifically Fletcher Street, Assabet Street, and Elaine Avenue. Also, there's about 150 feet from Dewey Street westbound on Great Road to Erickson's. It's no sidewalk, near a swamp. It's dangerous. People walk out there and around it. It's hazardous. There's been accidents there recently. Someone's going to get clipped and injured. Something needs to be done about it. We're talking about Erickson's Ice Cream is probably, in my opinion, the oldest family-run business in town, third generation. Erickson's Ice Cream. And, you know, they're taking care of a lot of the stuff downtown and other adjacent streets throughout the town. But this is heavily walked, this area. Something needs to be done about that. But in conjunction with that, Fletcher Street, there's a school bus stop right in the corner across the street from that. It's not an accepted way. Abutters and people on Fletcher Street over 20 years ago chipped in approximately $300 a piece to improve that road, and it was improved under the agreement that it would eventually be approved and accepted by the town. Never happened. Somebody dropped the ball. I'm not putting fingers on anyone other than the fact it was never improved. It's terrible. It's a feeder street to approximately 100 houses up in Assabet Heights. Deplorable condition. There's frost heaves, there's chunks of asphalt in the road. Drive up sometime and see it for yourself. Part of the problem was Assabet Street and Elaine Avenue were never, even though they're accepted, drainage was never really done properly there. So you got a runoff from the hill coming down Fletcher Street onto Assabet Street, causing erosion. You got frost heaves, erosion. Part of Assabet Street, you got frost heaves in the winter, I believe, and during the summer, during heavy rainstorms, the dry well, which isn't connected to to a system where it could expel, fills up the whole street there almost, in Assabet Street, on one full lane. So it's like an ice rink in the winter and a bunch of water in the summer when it rains heavy. I mean, it's ridiculous. Many other streets in the town have been fixed, repaired, or redone, who are not nearly in as bad a condition as these streets. I have a list here, which was supplied to me by the former DPW Commissioner, Aaron. And when I look at Assabet Street and Lane Avenue, yeah, they're major rehabilitations, but the streets above it, Durant, Hill, and others, they don't have water problems like we have up there. Nowhere nearly as bad. There's a lady here that spent a lot of money on her house just recently and fixed it up. It was a neighbor of mine, Christine, who has the road decaying in front of her house. She just put a new driveway in. Deplorable, deplorable. And it's an accepted way. I mean, it's dangerous for the kids. My daughter's boyfriend, the tie rods went in the car from going up and down Fletcher Street. Again, Fletcher Street is a feeder street to approximately 80 to 100 houses. And people go up there multiple times a day. And it's just ridiculous, okay? The town should set priorities. This so-called report isn't worth the paper it's written on. It should be revisited. People have to go up there, experts, and evaluate the situation. You got school kids in the corner. You need a crosswalk by Erickson's, which isn't there. And look, don't listen to me. I live in Assabet Street, okay? But there's other people here tonight that you should hear from because they go up and down that street as well. So you don't think it's just me. Thank you very much.
Hi, I guess I'll just quickly say something. Sorry. Hi, my name is Catherine Whitney, and I just spent a fortune having my house redone on Elaine Ave. I love my neighborhood. I love my neighbors. I love Maynard. I've been here 10 to 11 years. So I'm not going anywhere. But as my neighbor Al just mentioned, the road right in front of my house is literally just like crumbling, like to the point where there's chunks of pavement that are, it's just breaking apart. And I just had my driveway paved as part of the major project in my house, and it just keeps, falling apart. And when I was a kid, I lived in 2 different countries in Africa, and I always kind of joke that the road coming up Fletcher and the road, Assabet and Elaine, it kind of takes me back to my childhood. I'm at creep as I come up Fletcher because I'm afraid that I'm gonna hurt my car. And in a way, it's kind of good. It keeps people going really slow, but at the same time, it just would be nice to have, roads in better condition. And I think the big part is that there isn't proper, as Al had said, proper water, like for whatever the building goes, drainage, yeah, for the roads. And there's a lot of water coming down off the hill, and it just kind of creates like a stream, and so it's literally just eating away. So whatever happens, if they come and they patch it, ultimately it's just going to fall apart again because they're not dealing with the issue underlying all of the, it's just like a river coming down through there. So anyway, thank you for listening.
Thank you.
Sorry, guys. My name is Alex Santos. Me and my wife live at 3 Elaine Ave. We moved here from Arlington about 3 years ago, figuring this was going to be a fairly affordable change from Arlington. We tried to buy in Arlington, just couldn't touch the prices. We pay a shade under $9,000 in taxes a year, and we basically pay what we would have paid for probably a $680,000, $700,000 house in Arlington in taxes to live here for a house that we paid about $424. Our roads in our neighborhood, like, I love our neighborhood, and Al's absolutely right. It's a great neighborhood. It's 100 houses. I don't think I've met a neighbor that I dislike. Our biggest beef that we have, honestly, is that the roads are just really bad. I'm gonna have to replace some parts on my Subaru, which should be able to handle quite a bit, because it just takes a beating going up and down that hill. And in particular, Catherine's house, I think it's just because the lane, the grade is a little bit off, and there is no outfall for the catch basin that's down on Assabet. It essentially pools.
It's Fletcher Grade Road, the
yeah.
catch basin there, and then Assabet Street, they have one, but it's a dry one.
It's a dry one?
It's a dry one, it's just rocks in there.
Oh,
so when it fills up, it's actually counterproductive.
Yeah, it basically just creates a pool.
Right, exactly.
So we end up with kind of a funky flooding situation at the bottom part of the hill, and we end up with essentially sand washing down onto the bottom of Fletcher, right where it meets Great Road. Realistically, like, I'm trying not to sound like, and I'm gonna say this, I'm trying not to sound like an asshole, but we're paying $9,000 in taxes. Like, at the very least, like, at least, like, look into repaving, because we're not the only ones that are paying that amount in taxes. We got a lot of young couples, like, we're paying that $9,000, we get that the schools are gonna be updated, everything's gonna be good. most of the young couples in our neighborhood that have moved in the last 3 years don't have kids. Like, we're paying for the infrastructure, we're not necessarily paying for the kids yet. So, it would be great if it can at least get looked at and hopefully repaired. That's all I got, thanks.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Okay.
To join this bandwagon. No offense to everybody else, but I actually live on Fletcher. And Fletcher is, as I said, is real bad. And if it gets terrible, you can...
Sorry, can you give us your name?
Sorry, my name is Brendan Sullivan. I live on Fletcher Street. My wife and I bought a house here about 3.5 years ago. So, I mean, everyone has been saying the roads are pretty bad, but like if it gets real bad, they can go around and I can't. And some of the giant potholes have opened up in front of my house, right where the driveway is. That's a bonus. So just a couple of things, like they've said, like the pavement gets knocked up and ripped up, and what I find in my yard every spring is once the snow melts, the plows have knocked giant chunks of it into my yard. So I've got a nice little collection going, which is fun, but I don't really want that. The potholes are real bad and cause people to swerve a lot to avoid them, which is bad anyway, but there's also a lot of kids who actually come down to the bus stop, and it's not uncommon for people to go tearing down or up Fletcher, and there's a half dozen people walking up and down. We had a kid about 2 years ago, so we like to take him out for walks, and we have a very nice stroller, but I've more than once gotten it stuck in a pothole, and we have to literally lift him up and out onto it. And it's already a bit of a hill, so that doesn't help. Somebody mentioned sand at the bottom of Fletcher. All the rainwater just kind of dumps it out from the higher streets, so at the bottom there's just a sand pit. So whenever you're trying to get on a great road, especially with the traffic, you often spin out, and it's super dangerous for everyone, and traction, and then it just sits, even when the street sweepers come by, it just sits until next winter and just more sand gets added on. Now, like I said, I've only been here about 3 years, so I don't know the long and tortured history of Fletcher Street, but when we moved in, it was not in great condition. We thought, it'll get paved eventually, it'll get fixed up. Before here, we lived in Malden, and our roads there were quite a bit better, which is a little surprising, but we thought this would get done sometime soon, but it turns out, or it seems like it's going to be a long time. So just with the safety, and I can't avoid it, and we've got, my son's going to be playing soon, hopefully not in the street, but I don't want him dodging cars or dodging giant potholes. And they did a patch a couple of weeks ago, which is great until the next big storm, or at best winter, when the plows will just rip them all up again, and then just do bigger holes. So I think that's all my points. Thank you.
Hi everybody, I'm Michael Candela and I live on Fletcher Street too. I live right across from Brendan, and as long as we're all going to talk about Fletcher Street, let's talk about Fletcher Street. So I've been living there about 20 years. It gets to little pothole patches and everything like that, but there's no drainage, and I live right at the top, and when it rains it comes right down the lane and right over Assabet and right down the road and right down my driveway and through my backyard, and I just get a nice little stream going right through there. So I think you've heard enough about how bad the road is, so if it is bad, and if we could do something to have someone come and take a look at it, or maybe get it fixed, I think that'd be really great. So thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else?
I have something to say on a different topic.
Okay.
Is there anybody else?
Actually, I will say, well, first of all, I'm Jim Burrows. I live on Howard Road. I've been in town for 43 years. I'm kind of well known in parts of the town because I walk. I walk 3.5, 5 miles a day, every day, 365 days a year. I'll have to say, I don't know Fletcher Street, but that area right in front of Erickson's is probably the most dangerous place that I walk in this town.
Thank you.
So I can support them in that much of what they've said. But that wasn't why I came here. As I understand it, you'll be interviewing and making a decision on a interim person on the school committee. And I don't have kids in the school anymore. My oldest is 38. My kids graduated 15 to 20 years ago. But one of the things that I've always said is that Maynard was a place that people should go because of the quality of the school. At least I used to say that. I'm a little disappointed in the way things have been going in the years since my kids left the school. I think we need to do something about that. And I would like to give a little bit of advice to those of you who will be interviewing today. I have two principles that I would like to suggest. I actually do not know the people who will be spoken to. I wouldn't know any of them if I met them. But there are two principles that I would like to suggest. The first is that we recently had an election, and the obvious conclusion of that election is that the town wants a change. If you look at who won, who lost, the message is there. We need a change. And so I would think that people who represent change, as opposed to people who represent the status quo, should be given a more serious look, because that's the will of the town. That's thing one. Thing two, I've noticed that there's been a certain amount of problems between the teachers and staff in some of the schools and the administrators. And so I would think that being able to bridge the gap between the school committee and the faculty and staff would be important, and especially if they always also deal with the superintendent and the administrators, but they should really be able to communicate all the way down. And therefore, I would hold an experience in education as an educator, as a teacher, to be an important criteria for picking the third new member of the school committee. So I would like to recommend those two principles. And I will sit here and I will listen to whoever it is you're talking to. And I may have conclusions at the end of that. I do not have them now, but I have those two principles. We need change, and we need experience from the teaching level.
Anyone else? Any comments?
Hi, Nancy Gardstein. I live on Main Street. I will be moving to Concord Street in August, still in Maynard, 7 years. So I totally agree with the Fletcher Street neighborhood stuff. I've walked there. It's sketchy. So, you know, glad you guys spoke out. And also, I echo what Jim said. My two issues are with the charter here, Maynard, and I would very much like to see two changes made. And I'm going to try to figure out how to go about doing it. If it involves citizens petition or whatnot. The first would be, I am extremely disappointed that we are doing an appointment for the school committee vacancy. It should be a special election. It's just extremely undemocratic that it is that way. I know elections cost money, but, you know, democracy, I think, is more important than money. I don't think it has to cost a lot of money. So that is my first frustration. I was really surprised when I found this out. We have elections for Board of Selectmen when there's a vacancy. You should have the same for school committee. The second change I would like to see in the charter, we should not be calling it Board of Selectmen. There are two women here. Whether there are women or not, it's a select board. And Town of Arlington did this. I used to live in Arlington. There's someone else here who lived in Arlington. Other towns have done it. I would really like to see this change. I don't care if people say, oh, you're just being politically correct. It matters. It matters to me as a woman. It matters to young girls when they look to see who their elected representatives are. So I am not going to call it the Board of Selectmen anymore. This is the last time that I'm ever going to say those words. So that's all I have to say. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else? Give you your last chance. All right. So those are the public comments for the evening. Thank you all. Obviously, there's some issues with Fletcher, Assabet, and Elaine, and those will, we'll forward the information along. I don't know what document you have, Al, that you
I can
waited.
give that to you, sir.
I don't want it. I don't want it. Because we have one in town, that we have a company that, as you said, get some experts out here. We do have a company that does that for the town, and does it for all the towns, several of the towns that surround us. They grade each street, and they grade each, they grade all those things, and they go through that
It just needs
process.
to be updated, that's all I'm saying.
It's updated annually with.
I have no idea, this is 2000, I don't know what date it was done.
They update it annually after the repairs are made, whatever we do with our chapter funds for roads. When we're done with those funds and done with the repairs, they regrade the streets and regrade the streets for the next year's rounds of repairs and everything. So that's a document that's constantly being updated and changed. So I know that, but we will.
That's fine, but could I
Speak to
suggest
them.
one of the selectmen drive up around these
I've been
evaluation
there, I've been
sheets?
there, I know exactly where it is.
So they can just check and see if it's accurate, don't seem to be accurate. in my mind.
I didn't say anything wasn't accurate. I did not say anything about anything being accurate.
All right,
What I said was, we have a company that we pay, that are experts in the field, that other towns around us use and pay to grade and rate our streets for repair, for the purpose of spending our road repair dollars. That's all I said, and it's updated annually. I didn't say anything about that, I just said.
well, I'm just saying they may have good doctors and bad doctors, it may be a bad representation, is what I'm trying to get at, sir.
Okay. Minutes, we have some minutes to approve. And the minutes are from the meeting that we held on June 4th. I make a motion to accept and approve the meeting minutes of June 4th, 2019 as shown. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you. Does anybody have any questions or comments about the June 4th minutes? No?
Just a quick thing, is there gonna be a follow-up on the hours of operation for the marijuana things?
We have a few more, we're a long way from that, I think. Yeah, that'll be part of the application in the contract, yeah. All those in favor of accepting the minutes of June 4th? Correspondence items tonight. We have 8 through H. I make a motion that we move to accept the list of 8 correspondence items, A through H, as shown.
Second. I've got a couple of quick questions, if I may. First one's really a comment, and I'm assuming that this is going to be addressed because I know our police and fire department are on top of things like this. Even though it's probably far out, there's not far out in that sense, but far out in the distance. Even though it's far out, the Florida Road Bridge repair, one of the concerns that exists, and it was existing at the time that there was an initial comment about the Florida Road Bridge repair, is emergency access to that portion of town from the Main Street side, should that bridge be closed for any period of time. So I would ask that, and I'm sure they are, but that the police and fire department think about how they would route themselves in the event that that bridge is closed for any period of time, so that they can get to that portion of town quickly. So that's one thing. The other is relative to the letter that we got from the attorney, Brooks and Duranis, Mr. Kopelman, formerly of Kopelman and Page, I guess. Years ago, far out, maybe within the last 10 years, it was a policy of the Board of Selectmen that we would annually review all of our contracts and vendors. And we have not done that since Mike Sullivan was here, especially on our legal team, despite requests from the board, me specifically, to do so. I believe that this might generate a reason for doing it. Not that I support this gentleman, because I don't know who he is and I don't know anything about his firm or whatever, but it did remind me of the fact that we have not had a discussion as a board relative to our vendors and our legal team, and whether or not we believe that the legal team that we currently have with Mead and Bobrowski, or whatever their current term is, I think Mr. Bobrowski left, is the best one for us as a community. So I'd like to bring that as a conversation, and I'd like to also put it on the agenda for the Board of Selectmen on an annual basis, as it used to be, to review our vendors, not only legal, but otherwise, to make sure that we are reviewing them and not getting complacent about who we have as our vendors and et cetera.
Can I just comment on that while we're on that matter? I agree with David about reviewing vendors. But in Massachusetts, it's an ethical violation for an attorney to solicit business, which is what I see this letter doing.
Yes.
So I wouldn't be inclined to then go and interview these people if they're willing to reach their ethical obligations and rules in order to do business, because I would trust them as our counsel if we would entertain them.
But it did strike up a conversation, so I guess from that standpoint,
That's like an interview other
create
people.
create a little awareness for us.
No, yeah, I mean, it's been,
Lawyer Melissa. Thank you, thank you.
All right, but I second David's point.
Okay. Anything else? David, Armin,
No, good.
Melissa, Justine? Okay. So all those in favor of accepting the correspondence A through H? Thank you very much. Consent agenda items, our A through C. You make a motion, we move to accept and approve the list of 3 consent agenda items, A through C is shown.
Second.
Second, thank you. So, there's the Boy Scout proclamations. 3 of those, I didn't know if anyone was invited, or if...
I would be interested in going if nobody else wants to. I know 2 of the gentlemen that are being honored. They're both seniors in high school. I know them from friends with their family and their kids themselves for years, but I'm not, if I don't get selected, that's perfectly okay.
I've done it, it's good.
Yeah, I did it
And
earlier this year,
So
so.
it's,
I'm okay with that.
I'm okay with that, so you're gonna go, David?
David, you gonna go?
I'll be there, yeah.
Any democracy proclamations to give you for the event?
Hmm?
Would you like me to give you the proclamation?
Yeah,
Or
Either
Ken
or,
Demarest?
either or.
I'll let Ken Demarest know that you'll attend. Thank you.
There's also the retirement proclamation for Greg Balzotti. We're handling with that, or how that's gonna be handled?
Any of you going?
Yeah.
No,
We're
unless
not
it's
gonna
in
be able to
Chicago.
make it, right?
I will not be there tomorrow, but,
Noon to-
Oh. I can text you in the morning. I just have to double check.
I personally would just want to say something on behalf of Officer Balzotti, especially relative to, first off, he had a close association for years with the, lack of a better phrase, Toys for Tots program here in Maynard, that he ran along with the other officers, and he put in an inordinate amount of time collecting toys and running the program and making sure that that kids, I said students, but kids that otherwise wouldn't have had an enjoyment for Christmas had that opportunity. And among other things that Officer Balzotti has done for the kids of Maynard, he's also worked as a as a youth officer along the way. But beyond that, just his professionalism and the way that he treated the residents has always been top-notch. So he will be one of those guys that we will miss along the way, and I wish him the best of luck in his future.
yes. Okay, anybody have any comments on that, or any of the other 3 items? All right, all those in favor of accepting the course, Okay, the next is the item number 6, Urban and Community Forestry Challenge Grant, and I make a motion to approve the the Massachusetts Department of Conservation and Recreation Urban and Community Forestry Challenge Grant Acceptance Grant for $20,100. Do a second.
Second?
You want to tell us what we get?
Yeah, so,
What did we win?
Caitlin Young, Assistant Town Planner and Conservation Agent. So this grant, get closer. This grant is for $20,000 or $20,100 and will go towards a tree survey in town. The tree survey will include all trees along rights of way in town, within parks and on school grounds, excluding the school woods. And it will also result in a management plan, which will better help DPW plan and manage future tree work, allowing us to better budget for tree services in town. So,
Do you know if that includes the property that we own at the Maynard Golf Club?
I believe yes. That was put in as one of the town properties that they would be doing the survey for.
Thank you.
Nice work.
Yeah, nice job, thanks.
Thank you.
Now we have to vote to accept it. All in favor?
Yeah.
Thank you, Caitlin. Nothing's free. Thank you. All right, interview for the school committee vacancy, number 7. Where would you like to begin? Yep. So you guys need to open your meeting.
So we're gonna open our meeting.
Yeah.
Do you want me to take notes? Turn it on.
It doesn't amplify, it just records. They don't amplify, right?
You could hear, yeah.
It's just for recording purposes.
So Lydia's gonna take notes on our behalf, and we are now going to call our school committee meeting joint with the Board of Selectmen at 7:34 p.m. We are opening our meeting.
Yeah.
I had 2 last week, and a good one. Well, now I don't have any, but I'll pretend. Your meeting's
Meeting's
open.
now called.
Okay?
So, I think in the past, the way we've kind of done this process is that we have taken each candidate up one at a time and asked them questions. We've often ceded to the Board of Selectmen first, just to see what your considerations were, but we're very happy that you want to ask questions first as well.
That's fine.
Your board.
Your board.
Very good.
Yeah, so the person will be sitting with you guys, so you guys can, lead the way, and we follow as usual in this particular appointment.
Okay. So I'm actually just going to go in order of when we received the submissions. Does that make sense to you? Okay. So I believe that we received Josh Morse's submission request, his interest in the position first. So Josh, if you don't mind coming up.
Where would you like it?
I believe that you're right there.
Okay.
I do want to first say, before we get into this, just I really want to give accolades to all of the people who have submitted their names. This is it's difficult. First off, we have 3 community members who are extremely engaged, extremely invested, and have really been contributing in very meaningful ways in each their own ways to helping this community, and particularly in this case the schools and the children in the schools, and but also on behalf of the whole town by providing their skills and time and care to be able to help in all the committed work that we try to do every day. And it's been quite a year. So, and we appreciate all that everyone's done. So I just want to say that first of all, because that's kind of the baseline in which we're starting from, is that each of the 3 have been very engaged and involved. So so I just want to start, I think I wanted to see if my colleagues, Lydia and Mary, if you have any questions that you particularly like to ask Josh, or anything else you'd like to say.
I'm just thinking it would be nice for Josh to
say something, tell us
Yeah,
about yourself, and then we can.
Sure.
do that.
Thank you. So just to echo Bethlyn's comments, I think it's wonderful to be at a time in Maynard's history where there are so many people that are willing to serve in different capacities. I applaud anybody that's willing to step into the limelight, especially in trying times, and volunteer for an unpaid position that is most likely going to become a second full-time job. Because I think it's one of those things that when you do volunteer for a position like this, you need to give it everything you have. So I do appreciate everybody that's coming out tonight. Myself, I have been involved in Maynard for many, many years. I moved here a little over 11 years ago. At the time, I had just gotten married, just bought a house over on Powder Mill. Did not have kids, did not plan on having kids at that point. Yet I was within, I would say, 6 months of moving here, I was already in this room. Thank you to Sally Boubier for bringing me in to get involved with the Capital Planning Committee. I have since been involved in multiple committees and commissions in Maynard over that course of time. I believe I've served on 4 and I've helped out on 3 others. I don't think a year has gone by that I have not served the community in one way or another. My professional, so I'm going to do something I don't typically do. I don't normally talk about myself, so it's a little unusual. I have worked for the city of Newton for 12 years, so I don't interview typically. I did 6 years in the United States Navy prior to that, and I did a year working for the town of Concord. In Newton, over the course of the last 12 years, I was promoted 6 times, pretty much every other year. I am currently the Public Buildings Commissioner. I'm responsible for a little over 3 million square feet, 88 municipal and school facilities, 24 schools. I supervise between 30 and 40 full-time employees, and I have tens of thousands of contractors and professionals that work for me in different capacities. I have managed over $1 billion worth of capital projects. I have delivered every single capital project on time and on budget. I have never, in my 20 years of service, whether it be in the United States Navy, managing a department there, or managing departments in my career outside of the service, I have never required supplemental funding ever for any operational budget that I've ever overseen. I have always managed my budget. My strong fiscal management has led me to deliver every one of the thousands of capital and operational projects and initiatives utilizing an average of 1.05% contingency. Just to put that in perspective, the industry standard for new construction project is 5%. An addition renovation is 10%. So again, I utilize about 1%. I turn back tens of millions of dollars. I am the leading department in the city of Newton for turn back money. Having spent 6 years in the military under the use it or lose it budgeting, it feels very good to be able to turn back money on every one of my projects. So a little more about myself. I have a proven track record in successful senior level management. I am capable of managing up and managing down. I think that's something that a lot of people don't appreciate as much as they probably should. It is as important to be able to manage as to be managed. I encourage my staff to manage me as much as I manage them. I work collaboratively. I have built trust, and I've done that through collaboration, transparency in government, and communication. Effective communication and communication policies and procedures is a bedrock for creating a robust, trustworthy department. It's also the same thing for committees and commissions. I've chaired multiple committees and commissions, appointed and ad hoc over the years. I live by process, policies, and procedures. I've written them from scratch. I've implemented them. I lead by example. I work hard. I would challenge anybody to find one person in my entire life that would say anything bad about me, including any staff that I've ever had. Yet at the same time, I have made hard decisions along the way. Even with those hard decisions as a senior level management, I would still challenge you to find people that I've interacted with in those capacities that would say anything bad. I feel that the best thing you can do as a leader is to bring people up, to lift them up. Because if you succeed, Or if they succeed, you succeed. That's how I manage. I get results. That's it. I love to solve problems. And the primary reason that I am here today, I got involved last fall with the issues at Green Meadow. At that time, thinking that the issues were specific to Green Meadow. What I really found out was that there are some systemic issues that I think, when addressed, will help prevent the issues at Green Meadow from occurring again and can only benefit the other schools that we have in the district. Mass General Law, Chapter 71, Section 37, identifies the powers and duties of the school committee, and they break it down into 3 basic sections. Select and terminate the superintendent, review and approve the budget, and establish educational goals and policies. Those are the 3 primary responsibilities, and I think they were listed in that order for a specific reason. And the reason for that is that if you don't do the first 2 really well, you can't do the third. I think that's what people tend to forget, is that if you are not managing the superintendent effectively, if you are not managing your budget effectively, you can't establish solid educational goals and policies. Now, I know my background and my strengths. What a lot of people may not know about me, though, is that I've written educational programs. I understand special education. I understand ELL, and I understand sub-separate classrooms. I understand developing programs from the ground up. I've done collective bargaining agreements for more than 12 different unions. I've done it for over a decade. I've sat at the bargaining table for years on end working. I've collaborated. I've brought senior management together between staff and school committee, between staff, school committee, and elected officials, between residents. I resolve problems. I respect people. Everybody's issue, everybody's problem, at the end of the day, they want to be heard, they want to be respected, and they want to feel that you're going to follow through. You can't always do what they want. That's the reality. There are times when you have to say no, or you can't give them everything they want. But at the end of the day, you need to do so with respect. The budget is a primary thing. I think, look, the bottom line is I know what I bring and I know what I don't. One of the things I bring is I have a tremendous amount of budget experience. In the last 3 weeks alone, I have managed more than the FY20 Maynard Public School budgets altogether, just in 3 weeks. I have managed in my time the budgets of the entire 150-year lifespan of the Maynard Public School system. This is what I do. I manage large budgets. I manage large projects. I manage large departments. I have specific initiatives that I feel are going to be targets if and when I were appointed to the school committee, where we could realize savings and then redirect those savings to help either sustain our educational goals and policies or expand those. Specifically, I think zero-based budgeting is an awesome tool. For those that aren't familiar, it's where you build the budget from the ground up or rebuild the budget from the ground up. A lot of people think that it generates massive savings from single line items. That's not how it works. How do you eat an elephant? It's one bite at a time. Zero-based budgeting identifies small bits of money that add up over time and in the aggregate. Fair and sustainable union contracts. I understand contracts. I understand benefits. I understand short-term and long-term negotiation tactics. I understand what's good on both sides. I've been on both sides, so I do get it. But it is extremely important that the school committee, one of the things I think we need to do even more of, and this is done in the budget subcommittee, but I think we need to do even more, is work more collaboratively with the town administrator and the board of selectmen when it comes to budgeting, and not just our annual budget, but budget forecasting and budget trends. Because if we're establishing, if we make even mild or minor adjustments of the curve now, it puts ourselves in a better position. And if the school department is in a better position now, then the town will be in a better position in the future. And if we need help in the future, the town will have the resources available to do it. Procurement policies, procedures, and goods and services. This is my bread and butter. It's what I do. I manage contracts. I've managed thousands of contracts. Procurement, contractors, vendors, you name it, I know it. I understand the legalese as much as I understand the real world. A prime example of that, I think there's opportunities in transportation. I'd like to learn a little bit more about how we actually procure our bus service contract, where the buses are parked, how many bidders we get historically, what our bid list is, who we market those to, why aren't other bidders bidding. I can offer specific insight as to why we may or may not be able to attract additional competition in that market. What is the duration of the contract? Are we doing 3 year? Are we getting waivers to go to 5 years? That can improve your pricing. What are our fuel pricing, and how do we write that in? What is the specification for buses? How old, how new? Those can have tremendous impacts on your transportation costs. Cost-benefit analysis and subsequent strategic investments to control the rate of increasing pupil service costs, out-of-district, assessments, ELL, and IEP mandates. The reality is, for those that may not be familiar with school systems, the number of children that are being diagnosed early on with special education requirements is ever growing. And if we don't get out ahead of that, it will bury us financially. Which brings me to one of my other interesting facts that I saw when reviewing the documents that I was able to find online. Special education out of district has gone up 50% over the last 3 years, as presented this past winter by the school department. The number of special education students being placed out of district has gone up 30%. What's the difference? There's an issue between the correlation, but the other big red flag is that that's a massive change. It's not sustainable. We need to find a way to correct that curve. And one of the things that I have done a good job in my time in Newton about doing is working with the school department and our school committee to identify ways that we can bring kids back into our district. Sometimes you have to spend money to make money, and I think one of the things that Maynard would be well served in doing is to look at the school department as a business in some respects. It is because that is how many districts are successful. We need to have basic sound business practices. It doesn't mean that we lose the personal touch. That's important too. But there are basic business practices and principles that need to be applied to make sure that we are getting the most out of our dollars. I also think that it's important to take a look at charter schools and the recent increase in charter school, the number of students going to the charter schools. And I think what's important to recognize, as I said at the beginning, and Bethlen pointed out as well, is that we have a mobilized base of residents in this community. We have very intelligent, capable residents in this community. And I think one of the things that we need to do is activate them. I would recommend a charter school task force to analyze the movement and to see what we can do to stem the tide. And specifically on vocational schools, out-of-district vocational costs have gone up 48% over the last 3 years, while the number of students going to vocational only went up 6%. There's a major issue there. I don't know what it is, but if I get to see behind the curtain, I will produce results. I will find out what that is, and we will work to correct that curve. Establishing educational goals and priorities. As I said, it was the third thing listed in the Mass General Laws, because as I pointed out tonight, if you're not doing the rest of that well, you can't do that last part. It just ties your hands. Financially, you need those resources. You need the tools in the toolbox to make it happen. That's what I bring to the table. So, in closing, what I would say is, with my strong financial and fiscal background, I believe that I can find multiple ways to control our cost centers, reduce our costs, generate savings, which will then provide the educators in the school committee, the rest of the school committee, the tools and resources needed to deliver the best possible education for our children and make Maynard the best version of itself. Any questions?
I think I didn't even want to talk about yourself. All right, who has questions for Josh? You guys go first.
Thank you, first of all.
Mm-hmm.
That was a very comprehensive review. And very helpful to have everything laid out. And also thank you for the service that you've provided through the Green Meadow Future Committee and the countless hours that you put in that regard. I guess the question I would have in thinking about for the school committee, there are a couple things. I appreciate your consideration around you need the first two in order to get to the third, but I don't agree that you can't do the third without the first two. We've had to figure out how to try to continue to move forward and do things over the last bunch of years, despite the fact for a lot of complex reasons, we've had a lot of budget cuts along the way, and we've all been working to find ways to kind of work that out. But in the meantime, we have students in the system now that we need to try to take care of and consider and find ways to improve, even if we don't get additional dollars, because the chances are, the way things have been going and with what you would not have seen, and I appreciate that you would not have this background or understanding. We've had people on the board who have looked stringently at, like, much to the chagrin of many of the administration of the budget, because it's primarily personnel and staffing.
Mhm.
And so there's not as many places. In fact, we just developed a new transportation contract recently, et cetera. I guess I would say that in the area of that number 3, when you look at setting those educational goals and priorities, what is your vision there?
Thank you. So I would point to the fact that, so if you, and I would encourage people to look into this, so the old adage, don't take my word for it. The Massachusetts School Building Authority has recognized the Newton, which is where I work, the Newton educational program that I helped write as the #1 in the Commonwealth. It is literally the gold standard for educational programming. We wrote it from scratch. So I recognize what it takes to deliver not only clearly my background is facilities. So I know what it takes to deliver quality facilities, a quality working environment, a quality learning environment, but I also recognize what you need to do to empower your staff from the top down, from the superintendent, through the business office, through the principals, through the office staff, through the school nurse, the teachers, so that they can deliver a quality education. When it comes to the specifics about changes in educational programming, I think it's important that we rely on the staff that we put in that place. The school committee is there to identify checks and balances. It is important that we are making sure that it is going in a direction that meets our overarching goals and priorities. Are you asking?
What are your overarching goals based on what you understand of the Maynard school system?
Yep.
What are your overarching goals and priorities for our school based on where we've been and where we're going?
So just to be clear, I'm not trying to pretend to be something I'm not. I am not an educational expert. It's not what I do.
Yeah, I'm not either.
Yeah.
I'm not asking you to be, but I am asking you what you understand as far as the context for what we've set in place for strategic goals and where we need to go. Your understanding of where we need to go as a district, Maynard.
So I would say for educational purposes,
goals and priorities.
I think, I'll be very blunt then. I think that we have a massive void when it comes to policies, procedures, and protocols when it comes to.
Yeah, but I'm sorry. I'm not talking about that. I totally get that we need that. That
Yep.
is not a question in my mind. So I fully appreciate you bringing that to the table. I guess my question is around educational, as far as looking at what are educational goals and priorities. Those support those.
Yep.
But what are your thoughts around what we would need in Maynard for educational goals and priorities based on where we've been and where we need to go in Maynard?
Are you talking about MCAS test scores? Or what are you actually?
Well, I guess I would say there are some
School
examples.
rankings?
One would be that we definitely, one consideration would be MCAS scores, though there have been conversations in Maynard around that and whether or not that's the only thing we should be looking at and considerations around other things we should look at. So it's all right if you don't have a sense of that, but that's what I'm trying to understand too.
So what I was trying to get at with policies and procedures, which I don't think, let me try to explain it clearly, at least so that I'm being clear with my position on these. And that is that I have seen where there is a direct disconnect between parents and the school committee and parents and our educators with respect to, for example, obtaining services for students on IEPs. If we don't have effective communication policies, we cannot empower our parents to advocate for their children. We cannot deliver high-quality education. I would encourage everybody to take a look at the Maynard Public School website and look at our communication policy. It is one paragraph. It's not a policy. It's just a statement.
Yeah, I completely agree. That's one of the things.
That's just one example.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
So I don't have I couldn't tell you how to adjust our curriculum to produce better MCAS scores, but I can tell you how to establish policies, procedures, and protocols and improve our overall management structure such that we are communicating better with parents and empowering parents to produce a better product on the other side.
Yeah, and I wasn't asking, my question wasn't about that, just to be clear. My question was about goals and priorities, which is different than the how. But I do appreciate that they overlap. The spheres cannot be disentangled completely. There's a lot of overlap between them.
Mm-hmm.
Any other questions? Thank you, by the way.
Yeah.
taking my grilling.
Not a problem.
So, as Beth Lynn said, very little of our budget is discretionary. We don't pay our teachers, we're right in the middle, which is unfortunate sometimes. We really are trying to be fiscally responsible as much as we can. And so my question to you would be, how would you be able to help us? Right now, we're really trying to reach to the state because so many of the items that you talked about are out of our control.
Mm-hmm.
The charter schools, the Assabet, budget, and we're given a bill every year. Pay it.
Yeah.
The same with the foundation budget, things of that nature. What would you be able to do to help us really put more pressure on the state, which is what we're really trying to do now to help bring more revenue into Maynard, because that's what we really need.
Mm-hmm.
There's only so many places you don't have the experience, and I totally understand that, but the things that we have been trying to do, for instance, to spend a little bit more money to keep our students in our school system and to give that the out-of-district students, or to take advantage of the different collaboratives in that so that we can all really try and make our dollars go as far as they can while giving those students the best education that we can. So we're really trying to do a lot of that that you may not have seen yet. Same thing with the bus the transportation contract. There's only a certain number of buses that, as it turns out, there's a little bit of
Territory?
yeah,
No.
that they kind of talk to each other.
I know.
And so there are numerous things that have become out of our control a little bit. So I guess my question would be, how would you help us go to the state and bring more dollars into the town of Maynard,
Sure.
which is where I see that we need to be doing.
So I'll work backwards. The territory issue when it comes to buses is actually called collusion. It's illegal. So I can help because I know how to help. And I've successfully done that in the past as well. When it comes to advocating at the state level, I've worked with state organizations, I've worked with delegates, I've advocated, I've received grants. Specifically talking about state funding for public education, this is something that every community is struggling with right now, all across Commonwealth. It is a mess out there. So Maynard is not alone. I have listened to this for quite a few years because even though as of late it has become an extreme hot button issue, Maynard has had challenges because we're not quite one thing and we're not quite another. So certainly that is a challenge. I think one of the things that I am very good at is I present extremely well. I'm data driven. I can take data and I can present it in a way that produces results. A good example of that, I have successfully received hundreds of millions of dollars in grants in my time working through the state.
For what purpose? For facilities, for education, curriculum?
Combination of all of
for-
the above. Policy, procedure, facilities, operational, conservation, you name it, top down, inside and out. Some of it is operational, some of it's specific, it might be a 3-year term operational grant program. Advocating at the state level though, I have no problem talking to anybody. It could be 1,000 people, it could be 10 people, it could be 100 people on any subject. I'm a collaborator. I know how to network. I have contacts throughout the entire state. I've developed those over time. So that doesn't faze me in the least. Certainly that's one of those areas that I think all of us, quite frankly, because this is changing extremely quickly, are going to have to continue to work on, learn, adjust on the fly, and advocate at the state level. I talked about special education. That is a major, major cost center for communities all across the Commonwealth. And between the hits that are being given by the state from a funding standpoint, and then the financial pressures, as well as the declining enrollment that's being seen almost straight across Commonwealth, all of those things are having a serious financial impact. So I understand them certainly enough to be able to speak intelligently at the state level to help advocate for Maynard. I'm not going to sit here and tell you that I can solve that problem for the state. I don't have that kind of influence by any means.
Come on, Josh.
I'm not there. But I certainly can get us a seat at the table, and I hope that I can at least do a good job in making our position known and advocating for our needs here.
Thank you. And I'm going to second what Beth Lynn said, because I think the education, I think the three pieces are not intertwined as much as you think that they are. We can do the education piece separate from the facilities and that, so.
Yeah, and
the
to be clear,
operation
what
from the budget.
to be clear, what I was saying is that the education, if you don't do the first two well, you're going to struggle to deliver on the third. I didn't say you can't do the third. You can deliver education. It happens all the time. Budget cuts happen. Those are the reality, economic downturns. But if you are successful in the first two endeavors, it certainly makes the third one a lot easier. It's just the reality. If you have more resources, Greg, if you have more resources for the town, could you deliver an increased service? Yep. I mean, that's the way it works. So.
Yeah, it's a conversation we have all
Yes,
the time.
all the
We are
time.
not, that is certainly,
All the time.
we agree, but we work within limited resources all over, right? So we do what we can. But we are committed to doing the very best we can. And that is part of what you're saying, too.
Yep.
Question?
Any questions?
I gotta, if you want to finish up with the school committee, go right
I
ahead.
am good.
Yeah. First off, thank you for your service to our country, as well as your service to Maynard
Most
with all of
important.
the issues that all of the boards that you've worked on. You know, one of the things I hear you talking about, and I'm talking to the school committee members who spoke and asked questions, about the education piece of those three prongs. Looking at the school committee from the outside, the school committee needs to complement one another. Not complement in a you're great way, but complement one another in your abilities to do various things. Somebody, just as on our board, somebody is good in one area, somebody is excellent in another area, somebody is good here. What I'm hearing from Josh is not something to be criticized, that he might not have expertise in education per se, but God damn it, he is outstanding in the budgetary issue. And when I go out and speak to my constituents out on the street, the thing that frustrates the hell out of them relative to the school committee and the town, we're not taking any back seat on this either, is our inability to get our damn budget under control. And we need people who can look at this with perhaps a different viewpoint than we have before. And Josh brings that. And I haven't heard from the other candidates yet, but I would say that I think that, what Josh's commentary about budget, his insight into budgets is extremely important. And I'm a budget guy from this perspective. I always, from coming to our meetings, that's typically where I focus. And his insight into collective bargaining, his insight into et cetera, and his understanding of how decision-making at one time will affect decisions that are impactful 5 years down the road as a result of a decision that's made today. I think that's missing. We make decisions all over the place that are made, and then 5 years, it's like, oh my God, what did we do? And then we can't support the program that's been implemented. I think Josh's experience speaks to that because he has seen it from a different perspective. So with that, I would get to a question for Josh. Josh, what is your insight into how the relationship between the school department and the town can be improved and worked upon and built upon so that there's trust within the community?
Just to be clear on the question, school department and town, or school
No,
committee and
the
town?
school committee and the school, I think
Or
the school
together.
department.
Yep,
Because I'm
both.
talking budgetary buckets,
So I think that there is lots of opportunity for additional collaboration and communication. Not just on budgets. Look, the reality is we know that the issues that we've struggled with over the past year, a lot of them have to do with less than clear duties and responsibilities and who's responsible for what, communications, quite frankly, division of financial responsibilities. At what level is it something that the town should be responsible for? How does the school department budget for unforeseen circumstances? What's maintenance? What's capital? There's a lot of questions that swirl around there. And I think that how do we improve those relations? How do we improve that collaboration? You gotta pull people together. You got to break down those walls. You got to open up those lines of communication, and you have to do it early and often. I think that when you're talking about the budget subcommittee, I think is one area where I think there's opportunities to do even better. I think that I was able to sit in on a couple of the budget meetings, including the budget subcommittee meetings over the past 6-8 months. And I think they're very factual, kind of like, this is what we have and this is where we're what we're presenting. But there wasn't as much opportunity to really discuss about long-term financial forecasting, enrollment trends, what are the factors that are driving individual lines up and down, what's the full breakdown, how, and I think that's important because when the school committee is identifying those issues on the horizon. Like, for instance, when you're talking about cohort survival or enrollment projections, if you have a large second grade classroom, for example, and you have a bubble that's coming up, if you know that that right now you can sustain that bubble, that high enrollment in second, third, fourth, fifth grade, but when you hit sixth, seventh, and eighth, you're based on your class sizes, you're going to need another teacher or two. It may not be a budget issue right now, but it's important to communicate that with the town so that they know in 7 years, which may seem like a lifetime from now, but it gets there quick. 7 or so years based on current enrollment, and those are actual students, not projected, that you're going to need another $50,000 or $100,000 or $150,000. It's important to identify those things early on so that you're not triaging when the time hits. So it's not just getting people at the table, but kind of you have to force people to talk. You have to talk. You have to project. You have to think to the future. You have to think. You have to put yourself in other people's positions. It can't always be that. And I'm not suggesting that this is the case, but you can't be in the mindset of, well, that'll be somebody else's problem, or I'm not going to be on the school committee, or I'm not going to be a selectman at the time. You got to think the long game, because you want to set the future board of selectmen, or the future school committee, or the future generations up for success. Correcting small things early on can avoid structural deficits in the long run. One of the things in the financial subcommittee, when I took a look at for those of you that are on it, you saw the spreadsheet that I put together. The long-range forecasting for the school department and the town budget are not good. There's a structural deficit. The current ratio is extremely difficult. It is a significant structural deficit. And I'm not one to be dramatic. I really am not. We have some tough decisions we have to make, and we have to start making them now. We may have a balanced budget, and Greg and everybody, congratulations, because it was tough. I saw the cuts you guys had to go through. I saw what it took, and I appreciate, Mary, you guys are predominantly people. So I understand that. I am from a department that is 95% people. It's not easy to make cuts, and I lived 3 years of 6% cuts. I know what that means. It's not easy. But, when you put everything on the table and you're projecting out, you can make decisions early on that put yourself in a better position down the road. And look, at the end of the day, almost all of the problems that I've seen in Maynard over the years can somehow be traced back to budget. So we can say the budget isn't super, super important, or that small little tweaks don't make a big difference, but they do. They do, because we avoid a lot of these situations.
Thank you. Yeah.
Okay, the department is done. So I agree with you that and we talked about this a few different times, that the schools, the town should be handled as a business, should be operated as a business. A very important business, but a small business when it comes to the numbers, the dollars and cents. It's really a small business.
Mm-hmm.
Qualifies as a small business in a sense, based on some federal numbers. But so I agree with you with that. But except for the fact that the sensitivity of the issues surrounding shaping young minds and young lives. Other than that, the school committee and the schools are a little different than the business of the town. There's a little bit less of that in some sense. because you're dealing with children. But you made a statement, you said, not quite one thing, and we're not quite another. You made that statement,
Yep.
right? So again, do me a favor and tell me, what two things aren't we quite each? What are we? And then what do you think we should be?
So to be, yeah,
just
no, it's a very fair question.
Those questions. And that's
Yeah. So what I meant by that is that I believe the term, and I apologize because I probably won't give credit where credit's due, is that we are we urban, are we suburban, are we city, are we a town, are we a small town, are we a large town, are we a small city? That's what I mean, is that we can't, as a town, it's difficult for us to fit in a bucket when it comes to the state level, especially when you're talking about funding for schools or funding for the town itself, for that matter. So I think it has more to do with the not demographics, but the town layout and structure more than anything was what I was referring to there. When as far as your question in regards to, what we should be or shouldn't be, this is Maynard, this is not Newton. I work in Newton. It's a very different community. It's a very different district. It serves a different population, serves different demographics. I recognize that. I've consulted for towns with lots of different socioeconomic backgrounds. I don't make the same recommendations for one town that I do for another. I analyze, I overanalyze, I recognize the differences, and I tailor responses to those. I'm not trying to make Maynard something it's not. I'm trying to make Maynard the best version of itself. And I think there's always room for improvement anywhere.
Okay. No problem with that. So to echo what Dan said, thank you very much for, regardless of what happens here tonight, thank you very much for, volunteering for this and any other of the other numerous things you've done. And the same goes for Mauro and John as well, to volunteer. It takes a lot of time to even volunteer and to throw your name in a hat. We certainly appreciate it. I certainly appreciate it, and thanks for your answer. And Justine, Melissa, do you have questions for Josh?
I just have one. It kind of piggybacks on the everyone choicing out, or people choicing out.
Yeah.
So I have the numbers in front of me right now. In FY17, we had about $400,000 in expenditures for charter school.
Mm-hmm.
This year, I think it's estimated at 1.2 million. So the question is, how would you propose, I know you said a charter school
Task force, yeah.
task force, how do you propose to promote Maynard in the way that it needs to be promoted? Because there are people who, and myself included, who believe that Maynard High School, Maynard Public Schools give an incredible education. And there is a lot of value in that education, and they get a lot of things out of it that other towns don't necessarily provide. But how do you go about doing that? How do you go about promoting the schools, I guess?
So I think it's multifaceted. First of all, I think we need to market our successes. Look, I'll take a step back and put a little bit of my personal life on the table. I work for the city of Newton. One of the things I can do, if I so chose, I could put my kids through the Newton school system. I chose not to. I am all in Maynard. I've been here. I support the district. I think it's quality education. I just think that, as with any system, not just schools, any system, there's always room for improvement. So that's all I'm saying. But specifically for the folks that are going to charter schools or opting out, or school of choice, it is marketing ourselves, marketing our successes better, communicating those effectively. The other thing that's really important is how we communicate. I think that a lot of cities and towns rely on communication streams that may be outdated. Communication is very difficult. How you actually interact with people, and I would, separate from tonight, I would just encourage this. One of the things I've learned in speaking with tens of thousands of residents is that everybody absorbs information differently. Some people read the paper, some people read emails, some people you literally have to go door to door. I've done it. I've done the door to door. It's a lot of time and effort, but it can be done. Direct mailings, certified mailings, social media. I mean, that's real. It is. Social media is a real way to communicate with people. You got to take with the good with the bad there, but it is a real mechanism to getting that word out. The other thing that I think we need to do is we need to and I hate to over-survey. Surveys are important, but Bethlyn made a good comment at one of our previous school committee meetings in response to the survey that was put out at Green Meadow. Surveys are not the be-all, end-all. First of all, you don't tend to get a lot of contrary to popular belief, you don't get a majority of people to respond to surveys, even if you want to. The other thing is that you have to take that information with a grain of salt because it doesn't always produce the information effectively. Oftentimes you hear very clearly from a vocal minority, and the silent majority either don't respond or, they just mail it in, meaning that they just blaze the thing in with great scores and send it along. But really connecting with people that are either removing their kids from the district or have already removed their kids from the district, reaching out to them, even if it's not, even if we're not trying to take the tact of, hey, family so-and-so that you have brought or sent your kids to another school, why are you doing it? Help us. We're happy that you have found a great educational institution for your kids. Help us improve our system so that in the future we are not losing people. What could we do better so that future generations are more likely to keep their kids in the Maynard public school system? The other thing that I would say is, and it's not directly related to the people that are putting kids out of the school district system, but the other thing I will say from a state level is that there's a competition going on right now, and that is communities are fighting for children to put in their school system. We need to be advocating, and that's where one of the things that I think the school committee can do a better job is I think the school committee can mobilize parents to help support the Board of Selectmen when we're talking about smart development growth, because if there are opportunities for smart growth in the town that bring in more kids, it's good for the schools, it's good for the town. It doesn't mean that we allow every developer to do what they want here, but smart growth and strategic growth could be very, very beneficial. Sorry, I know that's a bit of an aside, but I think that that's the big thing. And the other thing is that there's a lot of very qualified people in this community that they're just busy working. So I think that we need to do more outreach to identify people who can help us with analyzing problems like this. That's one of the things that I learned when I first came to Maynard. I'll be completely honest, and I probably was stereotyping at the time. I kind of just thought of Maynard as a kind of blue-collar town for the most part. What I found is it's a melting pot. There are people that are from every profession. There are people that have a lot to offer to problems like this, or other committees and commissions in the town. They may not be able to volunteer for something that is going to be 20 meetings a year for 5 years, but for a specific initiative, they may be more than willing to help out.
Okay. Armin?
Well, first of all, I want to echo everybody else for thanking you for volunteering and at the same time for serving for our country. And thank you for that, too. A couple of things that you mentioned and tend to agree, because I think from a looking forward perspective, I think that's one of the most important aspects of, I believe, that not only us as selectmen, as school committee, collaborative, we should need to be taking a look at the future. So we need to find a way, to your point, is how do we promote our school system to the outside world? Because a lot of people out there don't know exactly how good we are. And the other thing is that you mentioned, and I think by putting a task force together based upon what you're saying about the charter schools, we need to find out what's working there and why are people going there. Because if something is happening there, we need to find out what's happening there so that we could do the same thing. So that task force hopefully will be able to get those answers and doing exit interviews for the parents that are taking their kids there. It's an excellent way to find that out.
It's a great point, and that's part of sometimes you have to spend money to make money. And I don't want to make it seem like it's making money, but if we need to offer a program that will pull people back in or keep people from leaving, it may be worth the money.
Yeah, and I think hopefully the agreement that we're going to put together between the school committee and the selectmen will put us on a path to be more collaborative. And I totally agree, and I know that we're hammering this budget thing to death, but I think it's crucial, because if we don't get that right, I don't think anything else is going to happen. So to your point, we need to get better at forecasting, we get to better at planning, we get to, as a town, as in general, and I think we need to get better at our, beating our own drum and let everybody else know how good we are. And I'm hoping, I don't have any questions for you, I just like to kind of echo some of the things that have been mentioned here, and thank you for volunteering to step up and offering your expertise.
Thank you.
I just want to give accolades to Bob McCarthy, because Bob McCarthy has been, he has created a long-term plan for almost as long as I have known him. And every year, we look at the long-term plan, and then we have to look at the actuality of our budget. So, So I just want to give him accolades, because I know he has done an incredible amount of work.
All right,
I guess
thank
you
you.
are dismissed.
I am
Thank
great.
you.
Thank you.
So I believe that the next person that submitted was John Skogstrom. So we're going to have John come up next. And John, I think that what we'll do is just start with, which is a great idea, to have you just introduce yourself, and then we can ask follow-up questions from there. Does that sound good to you?
Sounds good. I can't match Josh word for word, and I won't attempt to go toe for toe, but I am what I am. So what I am is a career teacher. I've known that I would be a career teacher since my mid-20s. I finally got the full-time teaching job at a school called Minuteman, which is nearby, and I haven't left Minuteman. I've been at Minuteman ever since I was hired, never any desire to leave. I'm a math teacher. I always had a math background. Early on, I taught part-time at colleges quite a bit. I wouldn't even know how to quantify that. I still am on the payroll for Middlesex Community College for a joint college and high school course that I teach at Minuteman. It's pre-calculus. I teach advanced placement calculus. 5 years into my career, I decided to pursue a master's degree, and I went to Harvard for a year. It was a great year. I was like a kid at a candy store. If I could afford it, I'd do nothing but take classes for the rest of my life. And I'd enjoy it, and I'd take all sorts of different classes, not just math. But here I am, a math teacher. What can I bring to the table? Well, I mean, I've lived essentially in schools for the past 20-something years. And I've known in my classes literally thousands of students. I know their desires, I know their needs, I know their dreams. I know why they choose vocational schools. It was a thing. I don't teach freshmen anymore, but on the first day of school, I'd ask each one of my freshmen, so I've asked hundreds of freshmen, why did you choose Minuteman? And so I would guess that I have better insight than most people, probably better insight than anybody in the room, I suppose, about why kids choose vocational schools and what we can do to meet the needs of the students who maybe could be served better without going to a vocational school. It's quite a commitment for the kid to make, and they trade off a lot of things, but they get a lot in return, and I'll talk more about that a little later. My son is 10 years old. We've lived in Maynard for 10 years, just a little short of 10 years. He was a very young infant when we moved here. We were excited about the schools. We were excited about the Spanish immersion program, and we got him into the Spanish immersion program. And he started to show some developmental issues. We didn't know whether he was just slow to mature, but he wound up being evaluated for special ed in first grade. And to make a fairly long story short, he's now one of those out-of-district kids that cost the school money, cost the district money, excuse me. And so once he was on his IEP, maybe even before that, I connected with the Maynard CPAC people and essentially never let go of those Maynard CPAC people. I wound up in short order being named treasurer of the CPAC, and I've been heavily involved with CPAC for about 3 years. Also, before my son was given an IEP, probably before he was evaluated, I went to school committee meetings fairly regularly, as regularly as anybody else, I suppose, maybe more than anybody even, but I'm not sure. I don't know who's there when I'm not there. Why? Because it's just something you do. It's just something that you do. Your kid's in school, you show up, you figure out what's going on. The PTO, well, the CPAC, the school committee were more my thing. I've also been a coach for, I've lost count, probably, well, certainly 25 or more seasons coaching, several of those varsity. I poured my heart and soul into that before I had a child. Once I had a child, of course, he wound up taking a fair amount of my time, and so I've transitioned slowly out of coaching. I still coached JV softball this year for Minuteman. And that's about it, I suppose.
So thank you very much. I appreciate that. And appreciate, I can attest to the fact for the years, this is my 4th year on school committee that I have seen John at many a school committee, and he's very active and always asking good questions and just ensuring that we are looking at accountability and considering that along the way. And has sent emails to that effect, always just very engaged. So I just want to mention that. And then I want to put it to my colleagues first, if you have any questions.
So, general one, what would you bring to the school committee?
Well, I speak high school. I speak schools. You know, I remember it was just a couple of weeks ago, WIDA levels came up at the school committee meeting, and it occurred to me, I'd be surprised if any of them really know much about WIDA levels. I mean, why would you? It's ELL talk, English language learners, and I was required to take a very long course in teaching English language learners. All math and English teachers have to do that as part of their certification. It was 60 hours or something after school every Monday night for several weeks with an equal amount of homework, you know, and so deeply immersed in that. I know about CPA audits. I know about NEASC evaluations. I know the special education regulations on a couple of different levels. Working in a school, I've seen some of the shortcomings of the IEP. As a parent, I've seen some of the shortcomings of the IEP. But in both areas, I've also seen the strengths of those things as well. Now, like I said, I've known thousands of students in the classroom, on the sports fields, at extracurriculars. And so, you know, I guess I understand the student better than an average person would, certainly.
Do you have any questions, Lydia? You want to think about it?
I'm so busy writing.
Yeah, keep writing. Keep writing. All right. So I appreciate, I can tell that you love teaching. I think right now we do not have, we've had in the past, we've had a teacher on the board. Right now we do not have a teacher on the board, so I really value that perspective. I do want to understand, I understand what you think you will bring. What do you see in the next year, where Maynard is at, that you see we need to go during the time that you would be serving? What would be your priorities?
Well, accountability, part of getting the budget under control, I think, is getting the contracts under control. I'm talking about the administration contracts down the road. I know that several of these administration contracts are sort of self-perpetuating. In other words, someone signs a 3-year contract, and I don't know, the way I've always seen it is you teach or you You do your job for the first year, the second year, the third year, and then you're hired back for another 3-year contract if it's decided that you're a good fit. But several of the Maynard contracts, like I said, are self-perpetuating. So you get a 3-year contract. At the end of that first year, if you don't get notice that you're not being extended, these administrators are automatically extended another year. And so you've got administrators who have had 3-year contracts in perpetuity. I can't say exactly how far that goes, but it goes back several years. There's one administrator I won't call out, but if you wanted to get rid of this one administrator, it would take you over 3 years. I believe it was longer than a 3-year contract. And so the 3-year date will be coming up again, and you could give notice there. But if you gave notice there, that person would be down to 3 years. It didn't extend back to 4, or 2 to 3, I forget which. But anyway, I think you see my point there. So I'm sorry, what was the rest of your question?
No problem.
I lost myself in
Truly
the answer.
understand being
No, there was
nervous
more, though.
and
There was more
with
I wanted to
everything,
say.
having thoughts in your mind and having to regain. So other goals that you might have over the next year?
Yeah, goals over the next year. Well, over the next year and over the next few years, I'd like to see Maynard define what its basics are in the schools. I see things come, I see things go, rather abruptly, it seems. I mean, my son is only in the 4th grade. He'll be a rising 5th grader tomorrow. Tomorrow is his last day of school. He hasn't ended the year yet. But today's the last day I can say, the last evening I can say he's still in the 4th grade. He's in the 4th grade, but I've seen some things come and go. I've seen music programs come and go really quickly, much to parents' chagrin when it goes. I've seen Ross Green's collaborative problem solving come and sort of disappear without a commitment made to it. The dual principal model has come. In my graduate school days, I was very lucky. I had some of the greatest minds in education, greatest reputed minds in education as my teachers. One of them was Ted Sizer, you may know. I don't know if you know the name, but he's certainly a giant in the industry, wrote lots of books in the 70s and 80s. But it was impressed on me, we evaluated just dozens, hundreds of programs, you know. It was grad school reading. Read about this program, discuss it, and see what you think. And invariably, I think when you set out to do something, you should first talk about why you're doing it. The dual principal model, we keep hearing that there's research behind it. And I'm not saying there isn't. And I'm not saying it's a bad thing. And I'm not saying it's a good thing, the dual principal model. But we keep hearing that there's research behind it. I've heard it several times at school committee meetings. I've asked, and other people have asked, can we see this research? And we don't have any research. Well, when you set out to pursue a model like this, I would counter that you need to know exactly why you're doing it. And you need to know exactly what you think you're going to get out of it. Because that's the only way that you can then evaluate whether you've gotten those things out of it. And the recent talk of the dual principal model at the school committee meeting very recently didn't give me any faith that any of that was really followed. And I'd like to see things, first of all, justified. Secondly, have the cost honestly and minutely analyzed, at least as much as it can. I haven't really seen straight answers to that either, to what the dual principal model costs. And talk about whether it's meeting the expectations that you set forth in the beginning. Not just sort of work through it for a couple of years and then say, hey, did that go well? And bring people up and ask their opinions. You know, analysis should go a little deeper than that. And I don't mean to just single out the dual principal model. I think there are probably many, many things that could benefit from handling in that way. We talk about, well, Josh talked about, and you talked about accountability of the superintendent. Well, I was active, and other people were active, saying, you know, these SMART goals are maybe not what they should be. And sure enough, we've seen that the SMART goals weren't what they should be. I mean, I know about goals in schools, SMART goals. I've lived them. I've been evaluated by the goals I've written. I've seen other people's goals and what they wrote. I saw the superintendent's goals. I know what can be accomplished through these goals in a school. And I know the shortfalls when you have weak goals. I've seen weak goals, not just in Maynard. Colleagues. I won't comment on how strong mine are. But I like them.
An important piece. You did speak to one thing that I think is important too. I think there's the short-term goals, and then looking ahead to longer-term goals. We've been talking about that too, and how that relates to considering, I guess, overall how we work with the town as we're looking at how we accomplish the goals that what the largest cost driver, the schools, are looking to accomplish. So I would like to know what you see as being the long-term goals and how we could potentially address those in cooperation with the town.
Yeah, I'd like to see Maynard, the schools, define what a 21st century education is. The students have one-to-one devices, or many of the students. I don't think all of the students have them yet. Is that correct? No. But they're working towards that, and that brings up a couple of different things that I think are important. Textbooks. Maybe kids won't be lugging around those 20-pound textbooks much longer. I don't know if they still are at Maynard. I suspect there are some students with heavy backpacks at Maynard. Can anybody verify that? Yeah, okay. Yeah. 80-pound freshmen with 60-pound backpacks. Well, all right, the tiny kids.
The bags are bigger than them.
Maybe not, yeah. Yeah. Right, and there are some pre-calculus books that are very thick. And I've looked at one that's open source online. It will cost me nothing next year, and I will be using it in my pre-calculus and advanced algebra class next year. There are also several online sites that are completely free that need to be used sparingly, I will say. They can be mind-numbing if you give students a steady diet of them. But Khan Academy and Aspen Math, and I know the math. There are probably other examples in other disciplines that are probably just as good or just as bad, but they should be looked at. On the other hand, I don't think parents want their children going to school and just getting hooked up to a computer all day. I know a lot of parents, I know I do, even though my son is out of district and not in the Maynard schools. I wonder how much time he's spending in front of a screen every day. And, you can't get necessarily a straight answer to that on a daily basis. There's going to be some bias on the teacher's part that creeps into it, or some lack of information being passed along about how often he's doing it in one class and not in another. And I think that does need to be coordinated. I don't think we want to turn our kids into computer terminals. So I think a discussion needs to be had about that.
Yeah, they did. I can totally understand that. They did have a technology discussion with the parents, so they did host that this year, but I think that definitely needs to continue as we move forward. Anyone else over here? Selectmen, maybe?
I have a quick question. John, you shared with us a couple times about your own child going out of district or whatever. I'm wondering if there are any lessons that his experience taught you about how you might be able to change what's going on relative to the Maynard district.
I certainly think there are. I can speak for my family and my child, but I also know several other out-of-district families. We've grown together through CPAC and otherwise. How shall I put this? I don't know a single one of those families that said in the end, wow, the schools really did everything to try to accommodate my son in Maynard before he got swept out of district. You could follow this up with other parents, but to confirm that. But I'm quite comfortable in saying that. With my son, He had paraprofessional support. There was supposed to be an adult with him all day in the classes. And it was kind of vague. You know, things would happen at lunchtime, and we assumed he had proper para support at lunch. But something would happen at lunch, and we'd ask the question, you know, well, what did the para see? And the communication that we had with the para seemed to be discouraged on some level, at least to a degree. And we couldn't quite figure out why there didn't seem to be answers about what initiated something that happened at lunch and at recess. It turns out, you know, I mean, paras have to take their lunch and take their breaks just like everybody else. And maybe the person covering for the para is actually covering for several kids at the same time. And maybe in some cases I've heard other parents say, we never figured out who the lunch and recess coverage was for our child. But I've heard several other parents say that the child didn't even know the para who was assigned to him or her at lunch and recess. And so, you know, that comes down to transparency, I think. Tell me exactly what services I'm getting so, you know, maybe I can better advocate for what my child might need, and we might be able to keep my child on an even keel. I have high hopes that it'll eventually return to Maynard schools. It won't be this year, it won't be next, but down the road, I really hope that he can be with his peers. You know, the isolation of the child and the family is not nothing.
How would you address the experience that you had? How would you address that as a member of the school committee? How would you address to change that?
Yeah, I guess you start at the top with the goals. There should be a goal about out-of-district placements. I've seen the out-of-district placements jump up every year. As a member of CPAC, you know, it was 18, 21, 24, I forget the numbers exactly, and numbers that I've seen for this year and projected for next are unacceptably high. So a school committee member can't single-handedly bring those numbers down, but a school committee member can write it into a superintendent's goals somehow that we have to get this out-of-district thing under control.
Thanks.
Well, just to kind of piggyback on what David said, because to your point, you had mentioned the paras.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it kind of goes back to the fact that if we don't do a good job of finding the money to be able to hire the proper paras
right.
in our district, then you're going to lose these students to out of town.
Right.
So it goes right back again to trying to figure out how we're going to be able to come up with the money in order for us to fund and hire the paras that we need in our school system.
Right. Well, these students aren't moving out of town. I mean, some of them are, frankly. Some parents do move their families out of town based on this. But, you know, my son is sent to a private school and transported to a private school at Maynard expense. And so the private school tuition can be $50,000, $60,000, $80,000, and the transportation cost is also unreal. My son is alone on a van with, you know, a driver who's dedicated to my son. He essentially has his own chauffeur. Chauffeurs are expensive. And this one man is dedicated to driving my son 45 minutes to an hour each way, 180 days a year. And so that's incredibly expensive. On the other hand, paras aren't paid enough. Paras are incredibly cheap compared to out-of-district placements. It's pretty easy math to do.
I just have a quick question. I know you talked about goals for the district,
Mm-hmm.
schools in general. What would be your goals for Maynard High School? What do you see as what the goals should be for Maynard High at this point?
I don't at this point know enough about what goes on at Maynard High to maybe make the most intelligent answer to this, or an answer that I can necessarily stick to and say, yes, absolutely. I'm open to learning on this topic. However, I think the curriculum needs to be aligned. We need to make sure that We know exactly where they're going, all the way up into and through Maynard High School, and the different levels as well. Now also, I don't love MCAS. In fact, I don't like it at all. But MCAS is a reality, and Maynard's MCAS scores are not so great. Assabet's MCAS scores are better than Maynard High's. Minuteman's MCAS scores are better than Maynard High's, and this is causing problems. For one thing, I talked about how I know best why students go to vocational schools. Well, some of them go to study trades, and some of them go for a different path to college. I might have wanted to do that if I'd had the option myself, 180 days in a classroom is a lot for some kids. Well, what if you could spend 90 days in a classroom and 90 days in a robotics lab, a biotechnology lab, or a welding lab? I had a student who went on to study mechanical engineering at WPI out of the welding shop. You think of tradesmen. Well, there are other paths to college, and those paths are, the path through Assabet is the right path for a lot of these kids. But other parents, I know, I don't worry so much about this. My son's in 4th grade. But if I had a student who was going into high school and I thought there's a chance my kid might not pass MCAS, I'd be looking at Maynard's MCAS scores and saying, I don't think I necessarily want him there. Maybe I'd rather have him at Assabet, where they do a better job of getting kids ready to take the MCAS exam. So I think that's one reason that we lose a lot of kids to that. And, I'm a member of a team. I can't take credit for Minuteman's successes on my own as far as the MCAS scores or anything else is concerned. But I walked into the assistant principal's office. I said, so what are we doing right? Why did we get this national blue ribbon that I'll talk about in a couple of minutes as well? And he said, well, it's targeted remediation of the groups that needed it. Now, what are they doing at Maynard High? I don't know. So I can't say what's right for Maynard High. All I really know is what we do at Minuteman. And that, to me, is just school. I can't really talk about the different features of it and what is important and what is not. But if I had the opportunity to look at exactly what goes on in Maynard High mathematics curriculum, at least, I could say, hey, I notice you do this. And maybe this would work better. It's worked well for us. Minuteman was a national blue ribbon winner this year. What that means is it's one of 36 schools that went to Washington, D.C. to be honored by the Department of Education for bridging the achievement gap, for narrowing the achievement gap. There were only 36 schools in the entire country, and Minuteman was one of them. And we're very proud of that. Again, I don't want to take more than my share of the congratulations for that, or the credit for that, but I guess I'll take my share. And and I know what we do, and it works. And I know that Maynard loses kids to Assabet for that very reason.
I have one question. You mentioned that you really wanted to focus on contracts and the administration. So I was just wondering what your experience was with collective bargaining and contract negotiations, and what you envision doing differently maybe than the current school committee or prior school committees have done in that area.
Well, the administrative contracts, if I understand things correctly, please correct me if I am wrong, are handled by the superintendent, and the superintendent alone. But the superintendent has to be made aware that, we don't like these contracts from the school committee. Where you go from there, I'm not sure. As for my experience, I've been on the bargaining team for the teachers union in Minuteman over the past 6 years through 2 contract negotiations. And so I guess I think I know reasonable demands and creative ways to give teachers something in the contract that doesn't cost so much money. And I also know unreasonable demands,
So I don't want to go backwards and talk about anything to do with the physical part of Green Meadow. And all that. I don't even want to touch on it, so if you touch on it, we might have to just shut the lights off. But in that whole discussion, in the whole debate and all those things, communication was a big issue.
Right.
Everybody that spoke tonight has mentioned communication. So as a parent and as an educator in another system, you know, in its communication from all sides and all angles, including, you know, the bilingual and multilingual aspects,
Right.
all those aspects that play into, you know, the robust communication that some feel we don't have, and, you know, the debate about those things. So as someone who's in the education field and someone who has as a parent of a student in Green Meadow or in the Maynard system, you know, outside of the district, but still within the system, what is your opinion of the, you know, those communications and/or lack thereof, and what would you suggest is a better way to fix some of those issues that seem to, you know, cripple the process? And, you know, we have, by the way, we have the same type of discussions
Oh, really?
with this group as well, and every year we have a goal meeting, and every year communication is one of the top 5 goals that we strive to improve on. So, communication, what's your thoughts of it, is relation to Maynard, and how would you improve it?
Yeah, I've been at Maynard School Committee meetings over the past years and watched several others on WAVM, where communication comes up year after year. We have a communication goal. We're going to do this. We're going to do this. And communication hasn't really improved. But I don't think the communication goals are necessarily very well written. You know, the latest communication goal in the superintendent's SMART goals talked about the number of things that he would communicate. And, well, you're communicating a number of things, but if you're just counting things to communicate, then you're not really focusing on making sure that you're communicating about the important things in the best way possible. And so I think the school committee should take that up. I mean, I've seen things mostly through CPAC. I don't have much communication with the schools myself, which is actually an issue. Out-of-district students are supposed to receive communications from the schools, and it's sporadic at best, I would say. At maybe very far short of sporadic. But for example, there's a certain protocol you're supposed to follow. You're supposed to talk to the teacher about something first, and then, or email a teacher if you have an issue. And if you don't hear from the teacher after 5 days, I've heard, then go to the principal about the issue. And if you don't hear from the principal within 5 days, then go up the chain to the superintendent. Well, that's 5, 10, 15 days, maybe, before you've gotten an answer on an issue. And so I think the expectations have to be tightened up on that. Yeah. Leave it at that.
Thank you. Yeah, I think we're good. If you guys are good.
Good?
John, thank you for.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for everything that you do for the schools. One second. I have to finish my note. Sorry. Okay, we know who's, okay, thank you. So, last but not least, so for people that may not know, we went in the order of when we received the submissions, for lack of any better order to go in. Mara Hogan, would you like to start with giving us an introduction and telling us about yourself and why you're interested?
Sure. So I've been a resident since 2002. I have 3 boys, 2 at Fowler and 1 at the high school. I have a small business in town, so it's a design business, so I've done a lot of stuff with a lot of the different other small businesses in town, like the food co-op or the farmers market or the economic development committee. So I kind of know a lot of different constituents throughout town. I have I've been on before. I'm recently just resigned so that I could go for this position, but before being appointed last July on to the school committee, I was both Green Meadow and Fowler school councils, so I worked on both of those for a couple years. I was also on the Global Competency Task Force, so we figured out what our goal from K through 12, our language goal was. I think we were supposed to do more than that, but that was our main goal, was figuring out our language goal, not just for Spanish immersion, but also all children. I've also been involved with multiple parent groups to resolve issues with the administration, whether it be for the Spanish immersion or with the middle school sports being cut last year and a couple others. Since becoming a school committee member, I've been on both the policy and the curriculum subcommittees. And I'm also a co-liaison, or was a co-liaison with Bethlehem to the CPAC. In that role, we worked closely with CPAC and with the administration to come together to collaborate. We really needed to get the both groups working together and finding a collaborative goal that they could work towards. And the biggest issue was communication, as we have all been talking about. One of the goals that I realized after last year's evaluation process for the superintendent was that we needed, as a school committee, to work on not only our evaluation goals, but goals for our whole district, along with what our role is as the school committee. So I've planned on setting up workshops. So we had one on the evaluations. We have another that's goals for the district that we'll be doing this summer, along with the role of school committee. So no matter if I'm on it or not, that's what I had set up for everybody. And then the other thing that I have worked on since coming on last July was improved communication, which obviously has we've needed to get better at. And so I've worked with the superintendent and really started setting down clear goals on how to communicate more effectively, and trying to figure out creating a rubric which will go into a policy. We didn't finish that in the time that I've had, but that's still a goal of mine, to go forward and to kind of work on that so that everybody has a clear expectation of what is expected of them when it comes to talking to parents, talking to the town, talking to anybody, and making sure that all the information that is needed to get out there is in the first time and not a little bit here and a little bit there. I think it's very, very important to have all the information right at the get-go. That's it.
Okay, well, thank you. So I guess that, as I've been doing with everyone, for you, I've also seen you've been attending school committees for a long time, and been very involved. And you've also just gone through you joined in July and then ended up having a very intense year on the school committee. So I appreciate the service that you've provided in so many different ways along the way within the district. And just as everyone, I appreciate the contributions that you're providing. So I just wanted to say that up front. And then I wanted to see what my colleagues would like to ask.
So I just wanted to talk a little bit, because I think there was another piece that you've been working on, because this speaks to Josh and to John, actually, about the IEP procedure. And I know that that was near and dear to you, too. So can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. Yeah. So, so one of the things, not only working as a co-liaison, was really putting together a kind of a roadmap for parents, whether it be, you know, brand new parents that are realizing that their child is struggling, and kind of where to go and how that looks. So the parent goes to the teacher, and then they have a meeting, and then kind of going on up the chain, walking through the whole IEP process, but so that it's very straightforward for the parent, understanding where they're going to end up, which is either their child being on an IEP or their child having some other way of being helped. And so when being on the co-liaison position, we broke down the different goals that we as a group needed to focus on. And so communication and being part of that roadmap work was one of the things that I was working on. And we did make some headway this past year on that, but there's still more. It's not finished. And I was hopeful that maybe starting in September that we would have a document that we would be able to have for teachers, that if a parent approached them, that they would be able to give that to them. So not only does it give a roadmap, but it also tells if there's a problem during certain times like lunch, that they would be able to go to this specific person. And if that person can't give you an answer, then the next chain of command. So.
Excellent, thank you. And if you're given the opportunity to serve for another year, what would your goal be?
Certainly to get that out there so that it's, you know, being able to, that any parent could have that. And actually part of that would also be for not just people with, you know, kids on IEPs or potential kids with IEPs, but even just a normal, you know, not normal, but a parent that may find out that there's an altercation that their child has with somebody or with a teacher, with another child, but that they have that roadmap to be able to, or that plan of, if there's an issue, who do I contact? Because I feel like we don't have anything like that, and we really need to have that, and that's a good way of being able to communicate with anybody.
What do you feel that you bring to the school committee?
As most of everybody knows, I'm not a big talker, but I feel like I bring a kind of a quiet, reserve voice, thoughtful, and you know, I strive to really try and get all of our children the best that we can provide them.
Lydia? Question?
No.
but I don't, it's something that should just be a school committee thing, I think.
Okay, okay. I guess. So I hear what you think for yourself, what your priority is to get done, but again, thinking in terms of, I'm going to ask this now as a two-pronged question, as before I had the follow-up. So you look at the one-year picture and where you think we as a district really need to focus and where we need to go. And then thinking kind of in the larger picture too, like projecting out, where do you see that we need to go over the next 5 years?
Mm-hmm.
And what's your understanding? Do you have an understanding of the mechanisms by which we could get there?
Well, I think that that's one of the things that as a school committee we need to decide on, are what are our goals, which I hope will be done this summer, that we can figure out a long-term goals for curriculum, for social emotional
trainings.
Yeah, part of the trainings, but that's something that we need to do anyway. And also, I feel like we also need to involve the town in some way, and that's something that we as all the boards need to talk about, how we see or what we want our schools to look like. The different paths that could possibly be it the WAVM or Spanish immersion or computer science or engineering. Those are all things that we have partially in place, but that we need to really plan long term, that if this is what we're doing, we need to do it well. And then we need to promote that. So that we keep kids in district. Granted, there's still going to be kids that go to Assabet or other schools, but I think that we could do a better job at that. So I hope that we'll be able to put in our 1 year goals, but that with 3 to 5 years looking out and then breaking that up so we know our steps to get there.
Anything else over here?
Okay.
Over there.
Yeah, I've got a quick question, if I may.
Yeah.
It's a very difficult year, obviously, for a lot of reasons with the school department and what we went through. And you've had the opportunity, as it was, to be there for that. Is there anything, as you reflect back on this year, you would have done differently?
Me personally?
As a member of the school committee, and the
Okay.
reason I ask that is now you are potentially being asked to sit in a situation where now you're going to be asked again to act on behalf of the voters and on behalf of the students and on behalf of the residents. What would you do differently that perhaps you didn't do, or maybe it just, there isn't anything?
Well, certainly I think that the being able to communicate to our members, our parents and townwide constituents, right?
Yeah.
Being able to do that with transparency. And I know that was a big thing. We've talked about it multiple times over the course of this year. It was a big talking point during the candidate race. And I think that, we still have a lot of work to do on that. And so being clear when it comes to what our plans are, whether it be, evaluations of the superintendent, curriculum goals, making sure that the school district, when they come to do talks, that we ask pointed questions, because I have gotten over the course of this year a lot of feedback saying, well, I wish you had asked this question. And making sure that the parents that do come to our meetings have a voice and are able to, when we have a presentation, that they are able to, spend some time to ask questions. And I think that kind of had fallen away this year a little bit. So I think that, being able to have that kind of open and honest communication with everybody. I feel like the last few meetings that we had were really good when it came to being able to talk more openly between the committee and the parents that came, parents and teachers and things like that. So I feel like it's gotten better, but we certainly have a lot more work to do.
Thank you.
Just actually the similar question that I asked John earlier, as far as do you see any goals for the Maynard High School moving forward?
Mm-hmm.
Because you have been in it for a year, you've seen something. So just curious if you have any thoughts or goals or what things you'd like to see.
Well, I think that it would be good to have a better understanding of the different tracks that we're talking about, whether it be the WAVM and what that looks like, because some of the things that I've been told is like they'll have say creative writing in that track that kids that aren't on the WAVM track could take. So things like that that I feel like are not very clear right now. And granted, we only got the accreditation over the last year, so we still are working on that. But we have other things that we're kind of putting into place, like the engineering and the and computer science that it's just starting, but that we need to have a better understanding how that all works so that we can promote it to our students so that they are excited about it. And the part of the thought process is putting it's like a feeder program, putting it in Fowler so that the kids that are there are excited to then take it to high school. But what do we do now for the kids that are in high school, and how that's all working? So we really need to look at that in more depth, I think.
I definitely think, and that this is just an editorial type thing, but I definitely think that, and I think you talked about this, is one of the weaker things has been rollouts of programs.
Mm-hmm.
We do have some amazing programs, but it's I think it's a combination of the rollout and the communication. If we could kind of tie it all together.
Right.
It would be.
Right. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
All right, so I guess we're going to close the portion where we are asking questions, and now, so I apologize because this is my first, I'm acting chair right now, so, and there have been lots of other things we've been communicating around for different things that are happening right now, so I'm not clear on the best way, if we talk about the best way to move forward as far as voting one candidate at a time. And do you know how to do this, Mary?
I think
I apologize to everyone in the room that I did not figure this out ahead of time.
that's all right. I think I always mess it up too.
Especially the candidates that are here tonight.
But I think that's, we vote on each candidate individually, I think. Somebody makes a motion and then,
That's what happened last year.
yeah.
In July,
And then, right.
One thing that I would like to emphasize is that regardless of how we vote, I'm not voting against any
That's
candidate.
exactly right.
I'm not voting against any individual or personality. It's more that I'm voting for what, and I guess the way I mentioned earlier, complementing the way that the person that I believe would best complement the board, the school committee that we've currently got, and what I vision, and what I'm trying to reflect from my constituents, I believe is necessary on the school committee at this time to make us move forward as a district and as a community. So again, so my point is, and I think I speak to all of us, we're not in any way voting to tell
That's right.
anybody that they're a no, or that we don't want them, or that we don't think they're valuable to our community in many ways, but rather just from my perspective is which person I believe would be the best complement for the group that sits there now. The three of you, the one that's coming, and then the one that would best complement those five.
Could the one who's coming please raise your hand, just so people in the room? That's Natasha Riviera.
So Natasha, that's the way that you did it
No.
before, right? Is that, yeah?
Well, I
Right.
didn't, I wasn't,
Right.
I know that last time when Mauro, you were appointed, it was,
Right.
there was discussion.
Yeah, I was just thinking
And
that
then,
as she was
and then there was, each candidate was voted on separate individually.
Yeah.
It wasn't one vote like, who,
Yeah,
you know,
that's what I think
Right,
was gonna be the
right,
way.
who
Okay.
did July
Yeah.
7th.
Yeah,
Yeah.
as you wanted to, your urge was discussion, and I think that makes a lot of sense for us to have some discussion amongst ourselves about what's rising up and for our thought process publicly, so then people will understand when we do make our vote, why that might be. And as you say, it's not against any individual, it's based on where we stand right now and where we
It's a
each see
positive
we need
thing,
to go.
it's not a negative
Right.
thing, and that's the,
Yeah.
I'm sorry, can I ask you a question? Is there a provision if there's a tie?
I think my suggestion would be, if there was a tie, that the person who is the tied vote, the person who drops out, doesn't get the same amount, then you'd have to have a discussion among us to make a determination at that point between the other two, as opposed to there being three. Obviously, if there were a tie, it would be between presumably two people anyway, but then the discussion
Flip a
narrows down
coin.
to just between the two that remain.
Oh.
Okay, so I would like to open up for discussion amongst our boards for considerations based on what we've just heard from the three candidates.
I'd be really interested to hear what the three of you have to say, because I feel pretty strongly that this is your committee and you understand, I mean, while we work together, we don't always know what goes on behind the curtain, so I'd really value your opinions after hearing all the candidates and what you think best complements you as a board.
So I'll start, and I absolutely value all three of you and what you would bring to the table on that, and I'm hoping that if it doesn't happen tonight, that you'll actually campaign next year to go on the board, because I think...
One of the three open seats that will be on the ballot.
Yes, that's
Yeah.
right,
As of
there will be
next-
three,
next
yeah,
year.
so, but I'd like to see Mauro continue for another year, for many reasons. She's been very, very valuable for the year that she has had. We have two wonderful new people that are coming on the board, but it is a serious learning curve, and there is an awful lot a lot of work ahead for this next year. Going to be much more positive, but there is definitely a lot of work. We've spent so much time. We've spent a lot of time at the elementary school. I really want to focus this year on the Fowler Middle School and on the high school. Those are going to be my two focuses. Mauro has two students at the Fowler, one at the high school, which also so she's got ears on the ground, which is incredibly valuable. And she has also served on the curriculum subcommittee and also has been very valuable on the special education PAC, and those pieces are very valuable also. So, and I'd like to see the continuity of the one additional year, because you have provided so much help and knowledge in that. And you are, as much as you don't like speaking in public, you are an incredible worker bee. And for that, I am very, very grateful. So that would be me.
So I have to say that I support Josh. Josh brings something very different to the table than any of the rest of us. And I've said this to other people who have asked me what my thought process is. And it's a couple of things. But one of the things is that the 3 school buildings are a major part of our district. And they have been neglected for too long. And we have not had an advocate for the buildings, and I think it's time that we do. We have an advocate for the students, we have advocates for the teachers and for the curriculum and whatnot, but the buildings have not had an advocate. So one of the things that Josh can help us do is to put in protocols and procedures in place, especially now that we're launching School Dude, to help track maintenance requests and work that's done. He can help us institute these procedures in all 3 buildings so that we don't ever end up where we are now with what happened at Green Meadow. He has a lot of knowledge, again, about budget. We need help with budget. And I'm not saying that the way it has been is wrong, but I think that his zero up perspective could be useful in us analyzing it in a way that perhaps hasn't been before, and really taking a look at helping us when we determine what our priorities are and where we want our school to go and the eventual goal. I think that his budget planning experience will really help us with that.
Thank you. So I have to say that it may not be surprising for some of you that it's been difficult for me to think this through and make a decision. I think that when I first heard that, first off, everyone really does contribute in they're very positive, valuable ways to our school at this point in time and to our community overall. So that cannot be discounted, but this is about where we are right now and fit and where we need to go. When I will say that when I first heard about Josh's candidacy, I was like, wow, like he's such a great speaker. He very clearly knows like things that I feel like I had to learn about some of the basics around public life. Like he's just interacted and done that. So it's just kind of in some ways in thinking through, I'm going to be completely and utterly honest, thinking through what we need to do with Green Meadow and getting through that to help us then create systems and bridges for the larger policies. It's like, he could just take that. I don't have to worry about it. But once I stepped back from that initial, and I actually have talked to Josh about this, I have complete and utter respect for what he's doing, but what happened to me was I was thinking, what can he do that he can't do on the Green Meadow Future Committee right now as the chair of that committee, that he's going to be able to build those processes and work in that capacity, and with a school committee that's completely supporting what they're doing, and at the same time knowing so deeply what we need to try to do for the students at this point in time and where we're at, and knowing that this year, the way that this year has gone, and knowing that we are all very committed and had conversations around accountability and around having 2 new people on board and really taking to heart the fact that this was an election for change and what that means for how we move forward and how we do things differently as a board and as what we are asking for our superintendent and what he needs to do, or she, is the case as we move forward. But in any case, not that I don't know anything, I'm just saying, hypothetically, very hypothetically. So in any case, the bottom line is that I feel like I would love to see Josh continue and do good work with the Green Meadow Future Committee and learn more about what we're doing within the schools as far as the education of students, where we are in Maynard, and tie that in, and then consider running next year. And I would like to see Morrow continue, not for continuity's sake, but because I see I know just the optics of it, it seems like, oh, budget, if we can figure it out. But there's so many yes buts in my head with everything that hypothetically and theoretically sounds like you're just going to be able to somehow figure it out. When you get slapped with things that we've been talking about this stuff for years and I feel like we've had people that have asked hard questions. Mary Merritt asked hard questions about budget. She was a pain in the butt to administration and trying to ask things. And I feel like I feel like in that process we've been working on some of those things, and not that it's not good to come up with new ways and new approaches, but in this coming year, we need to be able to look at, I see that our budget's really stretched based on what we've been doing, and what it is with what we've got, how are we going to make sure every student, and we're committing to moving forward in every student's education across the district. That's kind of where I'm at. So my support would be for Mauro in that regard. And it's not to also disregard anything John and his teacher experience. I really do appreciate that. And I appreciate what we've been doing together on CPAC as well.
You have things to say?
I'm just, I'm sitting here because to a degree, what I'm hearing you say is contradictory. You said about the importance of budget, but at the same time, you kind of know what's going on there, you're saying. And going forward, it is such a crucial aspect of what the school committee has to do. It's not just the budget, it's the overall operation. It's overall, looking at what Chris said earlier, you're a small business. Someone needs to understand how to run a small business. So it is very important, and I hear education, and I hear education, curriculum. Well, you already have those educators in the school system. You already have a dual principal, that one of the principals is supposed to be in charge of curriculum. And you have a curriculum director that's overall looking at everything. So you as a school committee, in my opinion, you are the board that oversees the school district. The school district is an operation. So that means from top down, you have to see what's going on. So education is a crucial aspect, of course it is. But running the school district, it should be your priority. So that leads with budget. If you don't know where the money is going to be spent and how it's going to be spent, then nothing else is going to work. So that's just the way I see it. Because I heard you say one thing and then you said this. So I'm just voicing my opinion from a standpoint of what is important from your committee should be looking at operations from top down, everything, not just education. You should be looking at everything from top down. Education being obviously important, but that's just my opinion.
Yeah, I actually don't disagree with you. So if it occurred as if I was saying the primary thing that we've been doing over the last bunch of years has been trying to develop the mechanisms that will allow us across the town
I understand that, right.
to be able to look at budgetary choices and considerations all together, right?
But then you also need someone that's be able to be the champion in charge and take the charge and do that job right.
Right, but that's intricately tied with your educational goals and priorities,
of course it is.
right?
I understand.
So that's like that you can't run with that without intricately tying to educational goals and priorities. And to be completely and utterly honest, my guess is we're just going to be nothing against anyone at the table, but that we're going to, if we've looked at the last 5 years of cuts, at this point, it's hard to consider that we're going to look at anything less than that next year. But this whole conversation for me, it still highlights very important things like that. It kind of says, it gives us a guidepost for where we need to be looking and going, and looking at the next year and the next
Just
5
by
years.
the way, there's an old saying, you put the horse before the carriage. So just keep that in mind.
I just wanted.
I knew what you meant.
One of those horsey things.
I wanted to just share also that we are incredibly fortunate to have a wonderful business manager that we work integrally with. And at the very beginning of the year, and I will say, every single year we've had budget cuts, and yet every single year we've been able to do some pretty extraordinary things by re-looking at what we're doing and how can we do it better, how can we bring some students back from the out of district, how can we create programs to keep keep kids in district in that versus going out. And David and I, we were on Justine were on the budget subcommittee before Mary Murch was there the year before, and that's everything that we do is we start at the beginning of the year and saying, okay, what is an intangible that we cannot change, and with the balance of what we have and versus what we want to do, how do we make that work, or how do we make our dollars work better to reorganize? So we are absolutely doing that in spite of incredible years of budget cuts.
I'm
So.
sure you guys are. Yeah.
And since I'm next in line, I think that's a good segue into.
Did he answer the question?
Huh?
Did he answer the question?
Oh, who he was supporting?
He didn't tell us who he supported.
That's right.
Oh, am I supposed to say that?
Yeah.
All right. Well, I'm supporting Josh.
There was a question there. Mr. Gavin.
Yes, thank you, sir. Again, going back to my point of complimenting, and so as each candidate spoke, I put down my notes relative to what their biggest strengths were relative to how they would help the school committee and what strengths they would bring. And obviously with Josh, based on my prior comment, I wrote budget, which I think is crucial. For John, I think he would bring in the educational aspect and the understanding of high school students, especially relative to what their thought process might be, where the other candidates might not have that, although Morrow has a son in the high school, so she could see that too. And then Morrow has the experience, albeit brief, the one-year experience on the school committee is helpful. But again, when I look at it, and Mary brought up the business manager. Well, the business manager is thinking within the same box that she's been thinking in for the last 2 years.
Disagree.
And I believe that we need to have someone that's outside of that box that can bring in a new idea and new thoughts. And not only new thoughts from Maynard, and I know that the business manager has ideas from when she brought the vocational school that she was at before. But Josh has the insight from a big city that can come in with broad ideas and broad thoughts and wide opportunities of different thought process that can come in. And I think that that's been missing. I think that that's part, where I think it's always been, well, let's start this program, and then it goes down and it sort of floats away, and there's not that thought process about the budgetary impacts. It goes the same way with negotiations, and when the negotiation, and I know you guys have a negotiation team. I don't know if they actually are sitting in the room at the time of the negotiations, but it seems that it's not consistent with what the town's thoughts are. And too often then we hear about this new contract that's come out that's totally apart from where the town wanted to be, and we have to pick up the scraps because now we're paying for something that we didn't expect to be paying for because that thought process wasn't there. So I think Josh has that understanding of municipal government and the way it battles with one another, and there is a battle despite the fact we want to work together between the schools and the town. And we need to have that in the room with you guys while you're having your debates, because he, I believe, would be able to say, here's where the big picture comes in. And I think that's missing. And I know that your focus is on education. Your focus is on making our schools better. I think Josh's would be too. He'd just bring in that perspective from the education. So obviously, my support is with Josh. Because for that reason, I think that would be the best for our community going forward, to try to get our ship in line so that we know the iceberg's coming. Bob McCarthy's spreadsheet has shown us repeatedly that the iceberg is coming.
Someone just needs to
And
draw
we need
that
to
on
be
top.
prepared, and I don't think we
Yeah.
are, and unless we have somebody that can help on the school
Yeah, the
side
whole community.
to-
I get what you're saying
exactly,
about
to
that.
prepare
Yeah.
us, we're going to hit the iceberg, and then we'll be in deeper trouble than we are.
I'm actually really torn. I think this is probably three of the strongest candidates we've seen in a really long time in the same election. I mean, in the last election we just saw, I think people are really stepping up to the plate considering everything that's going on. And I think they all bring something different, and I think everything that each of them brings is something that we absolutely need right now. So they would all complement you as a board. value of Morrow staying on for all the reasons you have all brought up. I feel really strongly though that as a board of selectmen, this is our board and this is your committee, and the fact that two of you out of the three are leaning towards Morrow, that's the direction that I feel I have to go with. And I would hope that if that's the direction we do go, that Josh would still stay involved and, as you said, run for election next year and stay involved in Green Meadows' future, and John as well.
Christine?
So I actually have a question. First, are there any contracts up this year?
I don't think we allowed for questions. No, just kidding. Yeah, so I did look into that. So I did my due diligence there, and there was a custodial contract that would be up for negotiation this year.
Okay, all right, but teachers,
They are not up this year.
I thought we had until June 30th to decide on Carol Gaines.
We do not decide anything.
Yeah, but we can weigh in on that.
Yep, but it's his decision, right?
but as far as teachers go, or
Right.
parents, or those are all decided.
The other thing that the contract for the superintendent,
Yep.
we as a school board will look at that and set that. So that contract, we look at that in September of every year is when we start with the evaluation process. And then if we were going to change anything, we would adjust it at that time as far as his contract.
Okay. So, again, I echo everyone in saying thank you all for standing up and volunteering to come forward. I have to say at this point, kind of like what Melissa said, that everybody brings their own strengths to the board, and I do appreciate that. I will say, at this point, I support Morrow, and the reason that I support Morrow is not only her year of service on the school committee. It's part of the reason I was one of the ones who voted for her last year to appoint her is because of her involvement in the school councils, in school committee meetings, in the global competency, in everything else that she has gotten involved with. She has a handle on the school. I think that at this point, education and MCAS should be a priority, because if we can get very good, solid education, solid MCAS scores, and the communication out there to communicate and market ourselves, then that itself will help us, keep kids in Maynard, and, we won't be losing as many kids to charter schools and other choice schools. I also do want to speak that, and I do appreciate all the experience that Josh has. The one thing that I've learned as being a member of another municipality and coming to this municipality is that I definitely bring a lot of ideas, but there are a lot of ideas that don't translate as much as I would like them to. So it is very difficult to do that. I appreciate the ideas though, and he has a million of them, and it is great. But I will say that that's something that I've struggled, for this past year, trying to figure out where my place is, and what can be done and what we can glean from other towns. But yes, so that would be, I do support Morrow for this.
Chairman De Silva.
You are up.
I was going to recuse myself because I know everybody know.
I know.
This is a huge struggle in the terms, in the sense that, we do have three different people here. And in listening to Josh and John and Morrow, you can sit here and your mind can change for either one at any time based on different things. But, then we certainly have the gentleman's point where, people are looking for change, but, I only didn't recognize you because you didn't have your hat on.
Oh, that's true.
That's because he's a gentleman. He took his hat off.
He took his hat off inside. Now I know who this is. I saw your hat when you got up. Quite respectful.
That's right. That's exactly right.
I can't wear a hat inside.
No, absolutely.
You know what?
Good man.
it's just very difficult, and but my initial thoughts when this whole process started was that anybody in the room that's ran for office in this town, that's lived through the foolishness of our candidates' nights, which I think are one of the most tremendous waste of time that we have of the town of Maynard, because to have 5 people answer the same question is just ridiculous, because by the time you get to the third person, you've heard all the possible opinions. And so, to put yourself through that, put yourself through the whole process, put your family through the whole process, I thought that, in my opinion, weighed heavily in Marlo's favor. Because I just think, she was there, she put herself out there 6 months ago, she put herself out there back then, and then another opportunity came up and other people said, oh, I want to do that. And it's a 2-week process. You say a couple hundred words and you're in, whereas someone else disrupted their entire life for quite a period of time to show that they're willing, able, and ready to take the seat. I also have read the charter 1,000 times, and I can't agree more that there are some things in our charter that need repairing. Fortunately, we have a charter review committee, and I'm sure that we'll get your question to them. And
I thought you were going to make me join it.
No. We know where you told us where you live, so we know.
That's why we asked for
You
address.
said that too. You said
In our charter and our bylaws are very specific in the number of people that they choose, and the people that founded Maynard choose to have run for election every year. And it's usually 2. Next year, I know the school committee's going to have 3. But they do 2 for continuity. They do 2 so that we have a sense of continuity in town, so that we're not constantly retraining new members, because it takes a year to come up to speed. With everybody that I've come across, including myself, to come onto this board, it takes a good year to get to where you want to be. And I just think to continually retrain a new person when we have a person that's been there, is in a person who's done the job, has not failed in any way doing the job. No one in this room has failed the schools, the school committee, the children of Maynard, as far as I'm concerned. The issues that we have in this town, in our schools, and with our buildings and stuff, predate anybody in this room. Predate their involvement in this board, except for maybe David, he's been here a while. He's been on the school committee. David's been here a while, but it's not his fault either, obviously. He's been up here, but there's just no one.
I'll accept whatever blame you want to give.
There's no blame. But we're all new to this, and we're all new to the problems that occurred at Green Meadow. And there's a lot of people in town that are laser focused now on our facilities and our buildings and these things. So I don't think that those things are going to fail in any particular way. And so I think that Josh's expertise, and I've sat with Josh and spoke to him, and everything he says and does is impressive, and he's impressed me tremendously. We had the discussion, and I told him how I felt, and I just think that those opinions about Marlo and her willingness to put herself out there, and the fact that she has been there, and we have a need for continuity, and the opinions of Mary and Bethlehem, who've both been there for a little while, I think they override this outcry for change just to change, because I don't think that Marlo's part of the problem. I think she can be a part of the solution, and so I'm going to support Marlo as well.
So John's the math guy.
So
I added up.
actual vote.
Well, can I make I know that Natasha is not on board yet.
Right.
Could she be allowed to, she can't, not vote, but can she allowed to voice her opinion? She's gonna be serving with that, she's gonna be serving with that person.
Do you mind
Do you
going to the
mind?
microphone?
Yeah, no, absolutely, yeah.
You're a candidate
Absolutely.
elect.
You can sit.
Get
Yeah,
used to
there you
it.
go.
Everybody in the room that doesn't know, this is Natasha. She that's coming.
Natasha is coming.
Wow, that's,
Winter!
sounds
Winter is
dangerous. I know,
coming.
it's like Game of Thrones here, right?
Term as a school committee member starts on July 1st, correct?
Yes.
So welcome to that, and good luck starting July 1st, and the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you for soliciting my feedback. I do appreciate the opportunity, although I am not able to vote. I do have my own thoughts on what I envision for our committee for the next year. And I will be serving with whoever's elected. In hearing, and I know each of these three candidates personally. I worked with Mauro on the Green Meadow School Council for years. I've worked with John, continue to, on CPAC as a board member, and with Josh with the Green Meadow Future Committee, and ongoing. I hear that, Josh's role specific to the Green Meadow Future Committee is limited really only to Green Meadow. So as his expertise will be valuable there, I think it limits his ability for budget and all those planning to only for Green Meadow, which the Future Committee is not beholden. That's not part of their goals, right? Is to deal with budget issues. I look at 1 year, because this appointment is for 1 year, right? I look at what is on the radar for the next 1 year that we have. We have a survey that's coming out that will be discussed and voted on this evening about sending out for Green Meadow. So the understanding of what that will tell us about Green Meadow and the infrastructure and the needs, what that will be in the next year, and planning around that will be important. I know the FinCom is very interested in keeping up to date, and I know Josh has greatly worked with FinCom in communicating information as needed with them. The other thing, which hasn't been brought up this evening, which I was surprised, is the MSBA, the core program, which Josh has a lot of expertise with, which Maynard has sent out an application for, and I believe possibly November we should hear something back from that. So I know I don't have the expertise in what that information is and how to digest that coming back. I know it has financial impact to our town as a whole, not just Green Meadow. I don't think his role on the Green Meadow Future Committee will allow him the ability to be part of those discussions because of what the limitation is. So I think should be a heightened awareness around what that means for our town. Is it going to be, they recommend a new school, which we obviously cannot afford, or is it, renovations and planning around that. I also think that looking at right now we have started to build a better level of trust with our teachers and our staff. Part of the reasoning is because of the Green Meadow Future Committee and what that brought about. It wasn't for anything the school committee really did except for creating the Green Meadow Future Committee, but it's the actions of what has come out of the Green Meadow Future Committee that has the communication, the outreach, that has allowed teachers to feel that they are, going into a building next year that, is comfortable, or, we're working towards getting it there. I know part of the conversations relating to out-of-district costs, which is a big factor for our town, special education, charter school. I know John, those are conversations that are not new. And so we've had last year before, we had parent sessions that talked about what we could do differently. I know that you were here, or you were there, part of those sessions. Why we haven't collected exit interview data on that. That is something that hearing Josh mention, having a task force, and that's something that I think is vitally important to how we're planning our how can we make changes to improve if we don't know why people are leaving. It's really, to me, just guesses at the best. I think that is, continuity is important. I agree, but I also, as mentioned, next year everyone has an opportunity to run again, so a 1-year break in service I don't think would be totally impairing for anyone. And speaking with Morrow personally. I know she has expressed interest even before the seat was open in looking at the high school council and being part of inclusion there, because I think as a whole, the school committee can do better in tapping into all the school councils at each level, and expertise from there is important. So that's my view. You know, I don't have a vote, but I'm looking at on the horizon on what is in the immediate. I think between, you know, although there's, you know, we do have some continuity here, Bethlehem, Mary, you know, I don't feel that I'm a novice at understanding many things. I read regulations. I'm pretty much, you know, I can catch on pretty quick. I have been involved in the schools myself, so although I will be new to the committee, I won't be new to processes within our district. So I don't consider myself a total novice to the processes of the school committee in whole. So I wouldn't say that there would be a break in, or a big interruption in the lack of continuity, if Josh were to be appointed. Similarly to John as well. I think having teacher insight is valuable. I know that's something that school committee members here advocated for strongly when Leslie Knight was running. So it's surprising how it's not being weighed so heavily this evening, because that was a really strong factor when people were endorsing certain candidates. So anyway, that's my view. I also think that the turnaround plan at the high school, to what you're talking about, is really an important thing. I think there'll be many folks, including myself, will be focused on how that we can achieve that. And there will be so many people focused on that will we have someone with a financial background can focus on the budget would be extremely helpful. Because I think all of us can probably say that we're not great budget folks overall. I know that we have a sense of understanding, but if someone can be more up to speed to push things along a little bit better, I don't think that would be a bad thing to be able to bring to the table. As David mentioned, everyone having a different set of expertise probably is a good thing. All like-minded folks, you know, I think is not what makes a successful board, and I don't think it's a service to our community. I think that was one of the issues that came about through the election process, is having, and I forget the term, elusive, but it was something that came up, groupthink, where everyone thinks in the same kind of way. I think having an outsider perspective is extremely valuable to any board if you're looking to make improvements for your community. So I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
I just wanted to make a couple of comments, a follow-up. The MSBA, I was involved in the high school, so I do have certain expertise in that. But more importantly, the group that was put together for the Future Green Meadow Committee, two of the people on that, Jerry Colbert and Anthony Mitty, I think those are the two, might even be a third, were also part of the MSBA. And so the thought process is that, and Josh was too.
Yes.
So the thought process is to bring those people, because ultimately we are going to be looking at to do something long-term for the school system. So the idea is to bring those people into that committee. So that committee is going to have some really good strength, as well as the people that have joined. The other thing is that we do exit interviews, and we have seen in the past years, we've seen a summary of what the why parents are leaving. The people that do agree to do an exit interview, because not everybody does, and we have utilized that information to help us make decisions. So maybe the public hasn't seen them, but we have.
I think that'd be
as a school
valuable
committee.
for the public to have.
So, like I say, it's a handful. We don't unfortunately get everybody,
Yeah.
but.
I do think we could have a
But we
parent
could, but
forum.
yeah,
There are a couple
yeah.
of things that'd be really good to do to be able to have more of a discussion around that.
Right.
People that may not want to come forward.
Absolutely. Maybe
And-
come forward with us, but
that
not,
would be
not
perfect.
permanent yet.
Yeah, no, and I think also just to piggyback off of what you just mentioned about the MSBA and replicating, I know that replicating the Green Meadow Future Committee in other buildings was an idea that,
Oh my God, that's
yeah.
what I've been saying. Yeah,
right, is an idea. So I think having someone who's able to guide that process that's beyond just their role in one committee would be helpful to have. So.
I have to say that I don't agree that the role of the chair of the Green Meadow Future Committee is so limited that they're not able to contribute in the ways that you're talking about. Already, that's been happening, And we've been
But
very.
it wasn't part of their
open.
goals initially when it was outlined. So maybe it has expanded beyond, I think, what it is.
I wouldn't say beyond, because what we've been doing is understanding all along that the policies and processes and procedures we've been putting in place are essentially things that are going to be useful for the whole district in any case. So this is kind of the entry point for being able to ensure that we're shoring up, because obviously, like School Dude will be useful throughout the district. So I feel like we're using what they're able to do there and this very unfortunate circumstance that we're in to be able to put processes in place. And I'd like to see that be able to continue as it needs to.
I was just solicited feedback, so I gave mine.
That's good.
Yeah,
Excellent.
yeah,
Thank
yeah.
you.
I'm sorry,
Thank
I'm
you.
not.
Yeah, yeah.
I will stop now so that you don't feel like I'm coming at you.
No, I don't. Thank you.
So, thank you. Does that change anybody's vote or opinion or thoughts, conversation we just heard?
The best way to figure it out is to take a vote.
Mr. Chairman, you can either take just a sense of the value as a vote, or you can have someone could nominate and then an appointment. You can do both. So a motion to nominate and appoint so-and-so for the term and then June 30th.
Is that the school committee that should do that, or the selectmen?
I think anybody of the united body could do it.
Last time the school committee.
Yeah, yeah. I'll make a motion to nominate Mauro Hogan to fill the next year's school committee term.
And appoint,
Sorry?
if you want to be more.
Oh, appoint. Appoint. Nominate and appoint. Okay. And I guess we need a second.
Okay, motion's been made. Discussion.
I think you seconded first.
Oh, we seconded first. I'm sorry.
It's okay.
Second?
I think it was already seconded.
Any discussion?
All right, so we'll take a vote.
Okay.
All in favor? Okay.
Correct.
Okay.
And I think by that vote, that's all we need to do.
Yep.
Okay.
And just again, to thank John and Josh, and there will be three positions open next year, so hope that you'll campaign.
And we're going to continue to work with
Oh
everybody.
my gosh,
I mean, that's-
absolutely, absolutely, yeah.
I believe we need to adjourn from our meeting.
Well, no,
Do we need to?
don't we need to still be in session for this?
I didn't write down any of the comments that people made on Facebook.
No, you weren't, no, it's just conversation. Are we supposed to stay in session for this? Qualification, the RFQ? I wanted to ask
You
the
don't have to
guys.
stay in session for the next topic.
We don't?
We don't.
Okay.
No, that was the letter that Girardi gave you, yeah.
Okay. Okay, that's my question.
This, need to sign it. All right, so, does anybody need a break? Quick break, no? All right. Number 8, we have a motion to approve a request for the school committee for the town administrator to develop a request for qualifications to procure services in support of town-wide facility maintenance, repairs, renovations, and replacement, including a study of the envelope of the Green Meadow Elementary School. Do we have a second? Thank you, Melissa. This is town administrator, sorry.
So, all right, Mr. Chairman, per the selectmen's packet, the school committee directed the superintendent to provide correspondence to myself requesting cooperation in their request to secure out of the school committee a number of times an RFQ, request for qualifications for a designer to contribute towards town-wide facility maintenance, repairs, renovations, and replacement. However, my understanding before the receipt of this correspondence that recent town budget subcommittee meeting would be that would be to conduct only an envelope study of the Green Middle School, again, which was referenced earlier. I'm not familiar with the RFQ process in regards to having a on-call designer for townwide facilities. It's not to say that it's not possible. I did have some questions for town council. I am the chief procurement officer for the town, so it is appropriate that they had that request to me, and then I would provide the recommendation to the board for execution of whatever contract would be the result of that process. But I have questions. I don't disagree that it's not a bad idea to have similar to consultants we have for engineering services, as alluded to earlier, our road maintenance program, water services and whatnot. It could be very valuable to have a designer services on hand. I'm not to deny that. I am just not comfortable right now with the procedure, but I do agree that it would be quite valuable. I agree with the board, with the committee, to having something at least for the envelope study for the Green Meadow School. I think that seems in line with their renovation plans and the Green Meadow Future Committee's charge. But townwide, I'm also hesitant to go down that path without a DPW director, facilities manager. I feel like I would be setting up another contract, as alluded to originally, that I just wouldn't have the manpower, so to speak, to directly supervise. So at this time, I'm more my recommendations for.
So, would you suggest that it would be appropriate to withdraw this motion until such time that we have a facilities and/or DPW director in-house?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I recommend tabling this until further time.
Okay, so unless there's an objection from a fellow select person, I will withdraw the motion and table this vote until we have a DPW commissioner and/or.
Can I ask a question of Josh? I guess it would be, what does that do for us as far as our?
All right. So I wrote this RFQ. It's one of probably over 1,000 that I've written. The on-call RFQ process is something that many communities across Commonwealth have developed. Our procurement agent actually taught procurement law at the state level for a few decades. So this is a contract that has been approved and vetted both through our procurement officer as well as the state well over 100 times. It is a non-binding contract. What that means is it does not cost the town 1 cent, nothing. You are putting it out. It allows you to have an on-call architect for any services that you might need, up to and including things like the Green Meadow roof, an envelope study. All this does is it allows architectural teams to submit their request for qualifications similar to a resume. You can evaluate them, and you can select those on-call architects to be available should you need them. Then, through that RFQ, you enter into a contractual or a proposal agreement for specific initiatives. So you would release the RFQ, evaluate the respondents, rank them, move forward, select a firm, and then negotiate a fee. If you can't negotiate a fee that you're comfortable with, you go to the next firm that applied, and you can negotiate the same project and the same different fee. When I first submitted this to the superintendent, I received some questions from the town administrator. I also was happy to, and I'm still happy to, write an RFQ that is specific to Green Meadow if folks would like that, and I did actually, and sent that one along as well. Either path is perfectly fine. It's the on-call design contract will allow the town to respond quickly to any design services that you might need, but you could not use it. You could not use it through the entire length of the contract. Doesn't cost the town 1 penny. Just to stress the importance, if we don't do this tonight, we cannot start our envelope study. And there are two critical sections of that study that I think are very important to highlight. And that is that we need to complete our structural analysis, because there are compromises to the structural components within the roof system. And we need to complete our environmental assessment to assure that we are providing a safe, clean environment for the start of the school year. The process just to issue the RFQ, get it in the central registry, advertise, solicit responses, establish a committee, that whole thing takes time. So if we're going to get this professional team on board and produce any results before the start of the school year, we need to move very quickly.
Josh, if this were to be just
Just the envelope study.
Just the envelope issue. What I get hung up on is the whole town-wide thing and the fact that you say it doesn't cost money. So if that's the case, and there's probably some municipal reason behind it, but why can't the school committee on its own put out an RFQ relative to the issues pertaining to the schools? It's not costing any money, so there's no risk, yet you're accomplishing the same thing. Can they do that?
So my understanding in the town of Maynard is that the only individual who is MCPPO certified is the town administrator.
That's
There-
not, just to clarify.
No? Okay.
Anyway, I'm as the per charter, I am the chief procurement officer. I happen to be MCPPO qualified, so but that's, I'm sorry, just to clarify that terminology. He's referring to a certification that the Inspector General's office provides. But what Mr. Morse is saying is true in that the school committee has a certain amount of authorities. But when it comes to being the chief procurement officer for the town, including all the various departments, the school department is one of, I have.
But if you were to sign this on behalf of the school committee, does that put any burden upon the town of Maynard as a, on the town side of the budget, per se? And if we don't know, I don't want to take the risk, because my concern is that we don't put ourselves, I want the schools to be able to move forward, but if it's not costing any money, what's the harm? But
it's a tricky terminology that I would probably would say.
By the way, if I'm misunderstanding this is just the process that we're going through just to get RFQs. So it's not something that we have to act upon.
There's no contract
So it's just
yet.
collecting information and get the so-called resumes in to look at to see what's out there.
Yep.
So,
but I guess
so
the question
where's the commitment from that
because
standpoint?
are we setting ourselves up down the road?
How is it that we're setting ourselves? We're just gathering information.
Like, aren't we required to put things out to open bids? So if we had a project at Green Meadow that needed to be done and we wanted to solicit bids for that?
It's true, but with construction contracts, it is, especially one that could be the potential nature of adjusting the envelope of the entire elementary school, having qualified designers is the first step. Sometimes you do that through an OPM, an owner's project manager, and then they procure the designer services. It's all just part of the construction process, so not to confuse it with just general services otherwise. I think doing it for the purposes of the Green Meadow School is timely, and I think it is urgent and it is in line with their other renovation plans. I am only addressing the correspondence that was provided by the school committee, which says an RFQ for design services on hand. And so if it was limited to just I probably wouldn't have a problem. But my questions came to on-hand services. I just wasn't comfortable with the time.
Is the reason, Josh, because there may be a possibility that in looking at the Green Meadow Elementary School that we're also, I remember the last architect that we had for the high school, the architect actually looked at the entire campus, the entire school system to see how to best utilize our dollars and so maybe we end up with 2 schools instead of 3 or something like that.
No, so quite frankly, the only reason that I put this out there, Greg, the email I sent explaining, by all means feel free to share that, because I was very clear with the reasons, is this is purely, it streamlines government. If you need stairs redone or an architect to confirm that the front entrance is accessible, or you need rails designed, even small things, it might cost $100, $200. You have somebody available for that purpose. If I were a Board of Selectmen member sitting in your position right now, what I might consider is approving this item with the condition that it be that we release the request for qualifications, obtain those copies, but not proceed with any contractual obligations whatsoever until that comes back to the Board of Selectmen for approval. I think that's required anyways from a financial standpoint, and you certainly could limit it that it doesn't get expanded beyond the Green Meadow envelope until everybody has a chance to fully vet and discuss what this is.
I guess my question is, so if we went forward with just the envelope study, what is to prevent us from revisiting when, maybe in a year, when if this is a good idea, which it does sound good, but it's taking a little time for everybody to get on board. When we have a DPW director and everybody is more comfortable with the idea, what's to prevent us from just doing it then?
So quite frankly, nothing. I might flip that on you and say that right now, because you don't have a DPW director and you don't have, and Tim's going to be leaving shortly, all the more reason to have something that you can execute quickly should you need it. Because all due respect to Greg, he can only wear so many hats while people are out.
And we do have consultants also, as well, but yeah.
So I don't feel comfortable with approving this the way the motion's written. If we were to change the wording of the motion, I wouldn't have a problem supporting it, but I don't like the language that we're gonna procure services in support of townwide facility maintenance, blah, 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 blah. If we amend the motion to say that it's particular to the schools or the Green
study.
Meadow study, then I think it's appropriate to approve tonight. But I think without doing further research and understanding the implications, that's too broad of a motion to approve as written.
So would you be comfortable with it saying to procure services in support of a study of the envelope of the Green Meadow Elementary School?
Yes.
Is that acceptable? You know, does that work for you moving your thing forward? Greg, any thoughts on that?
No, I'm okay with it.
Okay, then I think we have answered our own question.
Chris, are you okay with that?
I'm gonna be okay with it. I'm gonna make it, so, let's try this. Motion to approve a request from the school committee for the town administrator to develop a request for qualifications to procure services in support of
A study
the envelope study of the Green Meadow Elementary School.
I will second that.
Okay. Anybody have any conversation about that?
Makes a lot of sense.
All those in favor? Okay. Thanks.
Thank you very much.
Okay, bikes are good business.
Yeah.
Mr. Chairman, if I may interrupt.
Make a motion to close our meeting.
So, Mr. Salvi is here, and I was notified that he's been so gracious as to offer tabling this discussion, so if you feel like it's too late and other matters at hand. It's your choice as the chair.
Otherwise, as I was saying before, when we're invited to the Stowe Selectmen's meeting, we will be there until.
I was going to say, I'm chair of the Board of Selectmen as well, and I know if I was in your position, I might appreciate the option, so it's up to you.
I feel like you sat here all night.
No.
Waiting for your turn.
What on this, Greg, so we have Jim.
Yeah. Well, let's
What else on this agenda tonight?
Yeah.
We have somebody waiting to discuss.
The gentleman from the lift program
The youth?
for youth.
And that's it?
Yes.
All right, so we'll do the bikes.
Town staff, but that's myself and.
We'll do the bikes, we'll do the lip, and then we'll,
If you want to
I don't think there's anything else
clicker
that's
for the PowerPoint
particularly
that's coming
pressing.
up on TV.
Wonderful, so, terrific.
I
Thank you.
could use a vote of the board when it comes to the DPW director hiring process.
Yeah, well, you're
Yep.
not gonna get tonight, I'm sorry.
But
We're on the bikes.
let's talk bikes. But I agree, Mr. Chairman.
All right, so let's do the bikes.
Good night.
Well,
So do the bikes, the lip, and the vote on, what did you just say?
DPW director hiring process.
So we'll do-
Unless,
we'll do-
Megan, do you need anything on the draft, development agreement or anything?
We'll talk about it, you guys decide when we'll do the bikes.
Very good.
so thank you very much for having me tonight.
Thank you for waiting, by the way.
Thank you.
We do appreciate it.
It was actually really interesting to see how another board operates. My name is Jim Salvi. Like I said, I'm a selectman in Stowe. I know some of you. I certainly know Justine. Chris, I know I met you at the Zagster thing. David, I've seen you. And to the rest of you, hello. I'm also a board member of Mass Bike, and I've been cycling for about 12 years now. Former runner, and got into it when various parts of my body started giving out. And Bill Nemser has been kind enough to have me on his radio program, which I'm expecting a lot of people have been on, and it is quite the operation. But what I wanted to share with you tonight, this is a shorter version of a much longer presentation that I've done for your Economic Development Committee and for Bill. I want to first talk about our changing relationship with the American road, the American car, and with bikes. And the first point that I'm going to make is that transportation now is, as Bill would probably tell you, multimodal. People expect to be able to get places different ways, and for those ways to connect and that bikes are now part of it, and they're not going away. And we're also going to be talking about how cyclists spend money, what they spend money on. And we're going to be talking about how they're passing by, and they're passing through Maynard quite a bit. We'll talk about that, and how to lure them into our businesses. But before I get into all that, I want to start off with something that I understand kind of well, and I think most of us do, and that's baseball stadiums. So this is a picture of Ebbets Field, the paragon of baseball stadiums circa 1913. I could have easily used Fenway Park for this. Accessible by subway, by trolley, by horse, by bike, by foot, yes, by car, but no particular facilities for car when it was first built, no parking to speak of. You see parking here because this picture was taken in the 1950s after they acquired some land. Take the clock forward about 60 years, and this is the paragon of American baseball stadiums. Veterans Stadium in Philadelphia, surrounded by parking. It did have, I believe, a train station and a subway station. I went there once by subway and walked easily half a mile through parking. And the message was, if you want to get to this stadium, which was located in industrial land, you couldn't walk there, you couldn't bike there, you ought to take your car. It was right by a highway. Fast forward another 40 years, and this is the paragon of American stadiums. AT&T Park in San Francisco, just like Ebbets Field, accessible by subway, trolley because it's San Francisco, pedestrian, bike, this one by kayak, certainly by car, but I...
Worse parking than Ebbets Field.
Pardon?
Yeah. Worse parking than Ebbets Field.
The boats are parked over there.
And that's exactly what I was going to say. No particular parking facilities. I mean, there were some, but nothing special. The message from this, as opposed to Veterans Stadium, is think about another way to getting here other than your car. And the story of American stadiums is kind of the story of the American road. Roads were actually paved for bicycles. Roads started to get paved in the 1860s, 1870s, 1880s. And by pave, I mean, I think they call it macadam. It was just different layers of gravel. But they were paved for bikes. Bikes were the revolution. Bikes were the first time that a person could travel faster than a walking horse. Motor cars didn't come into being in great numbers until the 1920s. American roads in the late 19th century, very early 20th century, were for everyone. They were for horses, pedestrians, bicycles, motor vehicles, streetcars, which were everywhere, including here. Everyone was on the roads. That obviously changed. So by the 1950s and 1960s, America had fallen in love with the car. Pedestrians were on, and the reasons for this, and this is my short version of the presentation, some of them are legal, some of them are economic, subsidies to roads, fewer subsidies to railroads, a lot are cultural. But the point is that by the 1950s, 1960s, pedestrians were on the sidewalks, horses and streetcars were just gone, bikes were toys for kids, and they were largely on the sidewalks, and the road was for cars. This is not an anti-car presentation. You can tell I'm from that generation where cars meant freedom and fun and getting out on your own for the first time. Cars were a good thing and still are. But you can have too much of a good thing. And we started talking about congestion in our urban areas back in the 70s. It didn't get any better in the intervening 40 years. New York City right now, the average speed of a motor vehicle is 4 miles an hour. You can walk faster than you can drive in New York City. New York City is the best place for bike share because bikes travel twice as fast as a car easily. New York City is one of the places where, because of the traffic congestion pricing, which is where you have to actually pay to bring a car onto Manhattan Island, it's been instituted and it might actually work. Now, does this mean that our love affair with our car is over? I think the answer to that is a very definite, I don't know, maybe. Something's changed. This is a graph of vehicle miles traveled per capita put together by the U.S. Census Bureau. This one only goes back to the 1990s, but that trend coming up solidly goes back to the 50s and 60s. And you can see that something changed in the Great Recession and it started going down. It certainly recovered, but in recent years it started at least leveling off. It does not respond to gas prices, which is the interesting thing. Something has changed in the way we use cars, perhaps culturally. And I say perhaps because there's a lot of anecdotal evidence out there that younger people, in particular millennials, they just don't like cars. Maybe because they spent a lot of their childhood strapped in the back seats, listening to their parents curse out at other traffic. Something sunk in. But also IT professionals in our area, they don't like cars. They're looking for alternatives. They use them, but they're looking for alternatives. Congestion, as I said, has gotten awful in our denser areas. Mass transit, what I used to call, well, what we call mass transit, has gotten better. Now, this is a bad week to be saying that in Massachusetts, but it has gotten better. Don't underestimate the impact of smart mass transit. When you stand on the platform at South Acton or you stand on the platform of the Orange Line, there's something that tells you the train's only 3 minutes away. Psychologically, it's been proven, and take my word for it, the wait seems shorter. It just helps a lot. So, transportation now, people expect other modes of transportation besides just cars, and bikes are a part of that. In 2017, 66 million Americans said that they rode a bike. What I didn't put in here is 64% of all Americans said they would ride a bike if they felt safe. A big if, but if they felt safe. No other form of exercise appeals to that many people. 12.4% of Americans call themselves regular cyclists. Now, maybe they call themselves regular cyclists the way many of us say we eat healthy, but at least they call themselves regular cyclists. And in the Boston area, the greater Boston area, 2% of all commuting is by bike, and it's rising. And I don't know, 2% seems awfully low to me. I commute by bike sometimes, and it seems a lot more. The Minuteman Bike Trail is crowded in the mornings. So when they're out there, when those cyclists are out there, they're spending money. A few years ago, I started asking the people who I stopped in to buy stuff from what kind of business they got from cyclists. And I started getting interested in this because I was getting different responses, and it started making some sense to me. Cyclists spend money on different things. They spend money on, of course, bikes and bike stuff. They spend money on something called bike tourism. They go on trips to ride bikes. They stay in hotels, buy food. And they spend money on just everything that all of us spend money. Bikes are just another way of getting around. Fundamentally, they can be just another way of bringing eyeballs and feet and their attached wallets to your businesses. The bicycle retailing industry is a $6.2 billion industry. It's creeping up very slowly, so I just say it's been steady since 2003. Most of it is imports. This is a picture of an outfit called Parley Bicycles in Beverly, Massachusetts. They design the bicycles. They're actually manufactured elsewhere. I own a Parley. It's a very well-established brand. But the biggest growth in bicycles in recent years has been in e-bikes, electric bikes, or electric assist bikes. In 2017, for the past 3 years, e-bikes had tripled. And this is probably going to be the new largest growing slice of the bicycle demographic. Cyclists spend money on other kinds of things too. There aren't a lot of centralized studies. You have to kind of hunt them down. Some advocacy groups have collected them. Businesses along something called the Great Allegheny Passage Trail. That's a shared use trail that roughly parallels the old C&O Canal, so it goes through several states. The businesses along that trail report that they earn between 1/4 and 1/3 of their revenues due to bicyclists. And is now accepted axiom, really, that the closer you are to a bike trail, the more money you're going to make off of cyclists. There isn't much data in Massachusetts. There is a study from UMass, it's about 10 years old though, that for every $1 million spent on cycling projects infrastructure, that results in 11.4 jobs, but every $1 million spent on a road-only project results in 7.8 jobs. Now that might have been because of economies of scale 10 years ago. There weren't that many shared use paths, there are more now, But still, the fact that there was such a disparity not that long ago is very significant. Bicycle tourism is huge. I just spent all day Saturday touring around the Quabbin Reservoir in towns that I otherwise never would have gone to: Wendell, Leverett, Montague. I spend money. I had to eat. I spent money. This is the kind of thing that interested me several years ago when I started talking to people I was spending money from. Outdoor Industry Association says that cyclists are responsible for about $83 billion a year spent on meals, transportation, lodging, gifts, and entertainment. 2 weeks I'm traveling to Vermont, staying overnight just to do a bike ride, and I'm not going to be alone. There's going to be 800 other people with me. Unfortunately, there's very little federal data on this. There is a lot of state data. Maine estimates that cyclists spend in Maine between $25 and $115 a day, and other states follow suit. I'm not going to go through all of these because I'm respectful of your agenda, but as you can see, Vermont estimated in 2009 that cyclists had created 1,400 jobs in their state and was responsible for $83 million in revenue. And that's repeated in Colorado, Wisconsin, Minnesota, Quebec, that's not a state, Iowa. I want to put this in some context, though. Some of these states, let's say Colorado and Vermont, they're bike meccas. Saying that they make money on cycling is like saying Paris makes money on the Eiffel Tower. Good for Paris, but we're not going to build the Eiffel Tower in Maynard. There's got to be some other way to make money off of it. And there are. One is building bike infrastructure and connections between it. Another is having your businesses listen to what the cyclists want, not just shoo them away, but invite them in and listen to what they want, stock the shelves with what they want. And another is something government can do, which is have bike events. I'm going to hit these really fast. In terms of infrastructure, we're in pretty good shape here, largely because of our legacy of failed railroads. My longer presentation goes a little bit into why the railroads failed. I find it interesting. I'm not going to bore you with that here. But let's just say that railroads were the broadband of the 19th century. Everybody had to have it. They had to have it going through their town. And they didn't see the motor vehicle coming in 20 or 30 years. So cargo dried up. This diagram is a little bit out of date because you'll see that the line going through Maynard is dotted, and you've completed your Assabet River Rail Trail. But you can also see that when you look at the Assabet River Rail Trail, the Bruce Freeman is the one to its right, and then the one traveling horizontal is the Minuteman. They're not that far apart. And what Mass Bike and the Commonwealth are trying to do is build safe connections between these paths. Because again, 64% of Americans say they'd ride a bike if they felt safe. We can make them feel safe on these shared use paths and on dedicated bike lanes between them. So how are we doing on this? Really not that bad. This is data from MAPC, and it shows that in Middlesex County alone, there's slightly over 600 miles of existing and proposed bike lanes, marked shared lanes, those are those sharrows that you see, and shared use paths like the Assabet. Now that's a little bit, I think, of an inflated number. Those sharrows are not worth that much. Let's be a little bit more realistic. Looking at the existing bike lanes, the dedicated bike lanes, and the existing shared use paths, you've got over 300 miles of lanes and byways for bikes alone to travel on. And this data is 3 years old, so it doesn't include the Bruce Freeman and the Assabet River Rail Trail, which came online since then. So, are they passing through Maynard? Because that's what you really want to know. And here's something that you might find interesting. This is what we call a heat map of your town. This is not all cyclists, but many cyclists carry, as we all do, these little tracking devices. We've been convinced by industry to carry tracking devices. We record our data, how fast we went, where we went. We upload it to a thing called Strava so we can compare it and obsess about it. And our spouses don't like that. But anyway, Strava collects it and then compiles these heat maps. The brighter the line, the higher the volume. Now, it is labeled. I hope you can see that on your copies, but you can figure out the white line at the bottom is Route 117. The one above it that's mainly yellow, a little bit red, is Summer Street. I call it Pompasiticate Street, but you call it Summer Street. The triangular part in the middle is your downtown. The line that slopes from the bottom up, almost vertical to the right, is the Assabet River Rail Trail. And that's practically white hot. And then there is something very strange going on. I think it's down Route 27. That might be where your Rod and Gun Club is.
That's what it is.
I think those are mountain bikers. Yeah. So I'm just guessing at that. What this tells you is that cyclists are passing through your town, and a lot of them are passing through your town. When I do a Strava heat map of Stowe, I get lines like this, mainly on Route 117, West Acton Road and South Acton Road, but not much else. You have a lot, and you're getting a lot of traffic on that Assabet River Rail Trail. So the real question is, how do you pull them into your stores? Now, let's just real quickly do what we do in business school, which is do a case study. And one of the best case studies is the Harvard General Store. I don't know whether you've been there, but this is just a typical, well, a very nice general store. Nothing special about it. A pretty town, hilly, so a lot of cyclists like to go there. A bike shop attached to it, but really kind of separate. If you ask them, what's your volume, how many cyclists do you see, their response is, oh my God. They don't keep actual numbers, but they are inundated. The manager estimates that during cycling season, and let's call that April to September, during cycling season, they see between a 10 and 20% boost in revenue because of cyclists alone. They increase staffing hours for cyclists, and they reduce them in the winter when they see fewer. How did they do this? Well, they put in certain things that cyclists are known to like. Fast counter service. You don't want to stay off the bike for too long. You want to get your food and your drink pretty quickly. You want a place to sit down. In the winter, you want it to be inside. In the summer, you want it to be outside, so they have indoor and outdoor seating options. The biggest thing, their bathrooms are available to cyclists, usually. That is the biggest thing to attract cyclists. They talk to the cyclists about what they want. They listen to what they're not finding. They now have 2 shelves of those high-energy bars that people like Cliff Bars. And the great thing about them, very high-margin product. Very high-margin product. The Harvard General Store is making a ton of money off of cyclists. I have other case studies in my longer presentation about people who aren't quite this efficient at it. This is one, they really know what they're doing. So when I'm on a board of selectmen, I like when somebody leaves me with an actionable item that I can do something with and hopefully refer it to somebody else. So one thing that you could do to increase revenue from cycling traffic, you could think about planning an event. You have a very good economic development committee here, and you could task them with just interviewing some event planners. I don't think they should really go out and try to reinvent the wheel, but there are people who plan these things. And they could interview them, sort of do an RFI, and just get free information from people who hope to make money off of you. I can't help but think that the way your downtown is laid out, you are set up for a very nice, what they call criterium race. It is usually a circular race. Yours could be triangular, but it's around and around closed-off streets in a town. Fitchburg does it on a regular basis, celebrating the life of a Fitchburg local who was a very well-known cyclist. I bet they make a ton of money on it. They have family races, and then the women's division, the men's division, it goes on all day, and they attract what looks like thousands of people to their downtown, all of whom have to eat and have to drink and have to go to the bathroom somewhere during that long day. I think this is something that Maynard would be very well suited to think about. And finally, I just want to put in a really short pitch for Mass Bike. We do a lot of education for cyclists and drivers, very focused on safety. We sponsor Safe Routes to Schools, and for events like the one I just talked about, we even provide bike valets for people who show up, so people don't have to worry about parking their bikes. We'll take them and take care of them. If there's anything we can do in the future to help you, you are really, as that heat map shows, you're really well positioned to take advantage of all the cyclists going through your town, and I hope you do. If you got any questions, I'm happy to answer them.
One quick comment.
Sure.
Is that within the last, must be 7 years, 7 years, I'd say, there was a bike race, professional bike race, that was proposed for Maynard, and the business community, if I remember correctly, balked a little
Really?
bit because it would shut down the roads on a Saturday, and they wouldn't, their normal customers wouldn't be able to get there. And that's not saying that, I blame them for that or whatever, but it has been proposed, a bike race, professional at that. I don't know if, do you remember that, Chris?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Actually, I feel like I saw it last year.
Hmm?
I think it came up last year, too.
I thought Kevin was here, and but it was definitely proposed.
I'm not saying I blame him either. This is it's all a trade-off, and you got to take into account lack of parking and stuff like that. But boy, somebody ought to talk to Fitchburg. They've been doing it every year, and I think making a ton of money. And if anybody's protesting in Fitchburg, it isn't effective because they keep doing it. I can't imagine that it draws thousands of people.
Yeah.
So
We ought to revisit, find the people who came.
Everyone's attitude about all of this is evolving. It is a moving target. Bikes are becoming much more common. Look at your bike share program. You didn't have that 5 years ago. I hope it's making a success. Who knew? Acton just did a study of the South Acton train station, and one of the things they found that they were very surprised to find out, all the bike lockers are sold out. Now, when they put them in, people thought they were a stupid idea, and they're all sold out. And to relieve some of the parking, one of the proposals that everybody can agree on is more bike lockers. So I just think attitudes are that's the point of that graph. Attitudes toward transportation are changing. I'm not going to go out on a limb and say we're no longer in love with the car because I love my car, but things are changing, and got to think differently about stuff.
Do you have any specific ideas on how to, and I know that you said you presented in front of the EDC or the MBA, for drawing those people off of the bike path and on into our downtown? Because, hi there. Yes. Hi.
Mara Hogan.
Hi. Yes, I know.
I was part of the Economic Development Committee, not a member, but I was the designer to design the map of downtown. And one of the big things that we talked about was getting the map out and having it at all the different stores downtown, but we also made sure that we put it on the rail trail so that people could stop and look at it and figure out, hey, I want to go to this restaurant, because it's all on the index, and where it is, then they can use that map. So that we could draw those bicyclists into the downtown.
And that's the thing is, I'm not sure, and you can speak as a cyclist, whether will you go off the beaten path because you're on the rail trail, but then I know we kind of go through downtown, but then you kind of bypass it if you're on the rail trail.
Yeah, so there's two kinds of people. There's those who know Maynard and know that when they go off the path and head in a certain direction, they know what's there. And then there's others who don't know Maynard or passing through, and they're very wary of going off where they don't know, not knowing. It's a lot like when you get off a highway hoping to find a gas station. So the best thing is, as Maura just said, a sign on the bike path telling people what they're going to get and about how far. When I did this thing on Saturday in Wendell, there was a sign for a general store, 3 miles. 3 miles, frankly, sounded like too far to me, so I passed that one. But I went to another one that was a half mile, and I knew I could get back to the course that I was on. But the point is that, they're putting up signs to draw you. They're not counting on your knowledge of what's around. Despite the fact that this does have a GPS, and if I used it to its maximum capability, it would tell me where stores are. Nobody does that.
So it's more creating like the exit points.
Yes.
Off of the rail trail.
Yes, and reducing the anxiety about literally leaving the beaten path.
Right.
And I really do think it's just like on highways. 20 years ago, they started adding the mileage. Exxon station, it used to say Exxon station this way, and you'd go 10 miles. But now it says Exxon station 1.5. So you do that. I think that's part of it. Thanks again.
Thank you.
Thanks again for having me on a difficult night, and I appreciate it. Thank you.
Okay, Bill.
What we can do, Mr. Chairman, trying to recall, is there an urgency that we need, should we have the selectmen, or the individuals from the local initiative program application for the view?
Sorry,
correct?
Yes.
Yes, okay. So come on up, gentlemen, come on up.
Good evening.
That's good. You guys are not sleeping yet.
Is that okay?
Not yet.
Oh, you know what, okay, you said Bill, I just want to make sure.
Well, I thought Bill. Yeah, Bill was on here somewhere.
All right, okay.
So, make a motion that we move to accept the local initiative program application for local action units at the View at Maynard Crossing and endorse the local housing partnership between Maynard's Affordable Housing Trust and the Board of Selectmen. Do you have a second?
Second?
Okay.
Hello.
Hello.
Introduce yourselves,
Good evening.
gentlemen, and
Welcome.
Tell us why you're here.
Sure. My name is David Cashman. I work at SEB Housing, which is an affordable housing consultant and lottery agent. We do projects all over Massachusetts. I'm joined by Tom Hayden, who works for Lecessi Development Corporation, and they are the developers of the View, who hired us to help them with affordable compliance and running the lottery and getting all the marketing and documents together to present to the Affordable Housing Trust, now the board. We hope to get a signature soon and then move it on to the state so we can get this lottery underway and get the affordable units filled up, hopefully.
Absolutely. That sums it up.
I've got a quick question
Sure.
about the affordable units.
Doesn't have to be
and-
quick.
Huh?
Doesn't have to be quick.
Well, it's intended to be quick. There was some concern I sit on the Affordable Housing Trust itself, and there was some concern while we were having some preliminary discussion about the affordable units at the View and parking, accessibility to parking, and equal accessibility to parking for people who purchased affordable units. For example, I believe that there are parking garages at that location around the edge. Is there equal percentage of access to affordable units for the parking garages at reduced rates that there would be for people who are living in the affordable units? In other words, are the affordable unit owners or renters given the same potential at a reduced rate to get parking?
Just to clarify, nobody purchases units. The
Rentals.
units are all rented, are there. And each of the units does have equal access to surface parking. There are no reserved spaces for
Understood.
any of the residents. As far as the garages themselves, I don't have the answer to that.
Okay, there was some concern expressed because we don't want to have affordable units where people don't have the
Yeah.
same
It's a fair point.
access to parking in those garages as people who are paying full freight. So we don't want to give the impression that because, I live in an affordable unit, I don't have access to, it's just, from that perspective.
Yeah, fair
That was
point.
one question.
Okay.
The other thing, and I think we fixed this, there was some concern because I guess there's an issue with handicapped accessible units. If I remember correctly, if my math is correct, the availability of handicapped accessible units, if they were not going to handicapped individuals, were percentage-wise were being made more available to as affordable units versus non-affordable units. And the concern expressed there was handicapped units have lower cabinets and lower faucets and lower toilets, so they're not as people don't want them because they're not for able-bodied people, they're for disabled people. So everything is making you bend, everything is lower, everything is off kilter. And I think we fixed that through an agreement that we had with somebody that made sure that the balance of available, if they weren't going to disabled people, were going to be equally distributed among affordable units and regularly priced units, for lack of a better phrase.
Yeah, that was definitely an issue
Yeah.
that came up, though, subject to discussion.
And it's been rectified, I believe.
Changed to the housing
Yeah,
trust.
okay, great.
Desired allocation.
Exactly, yeah. Good. Those were the issues that because there's been some, that's the discussion of the affordable housing part of it. But part of the affordable housing trust discussion is equity. And that the people who are renting in an affordable unit do not get treated any differently from those who are living in a regularly priced unit.
No other comments, Mr.
If you can look
I'm
at the
taking notes
parking
on
issue,
minutes, so-
Yes.
especially for the garage,
Oh, sure,
that'd be
yeah.
helpful. And just send an email to town hall staff.
Yeah.
Thank
We'll
you.
absolutely do that.
Thank
Yeah.
I just have a question about how far out do you guys think you are from?
Yeah, that was gonna be my question.
Well, we got some good.
I realize it's-
Well, we got some good news today. We think we'll have Eversource out to the property next Monday, so fingers crossed on that. And if that is the case, then we are hopeful of opening the first units in probably mid-September is when we would open.
Is there no electricity there right now?
There is no electricity there now.
Do you think it'll be safe for residents to be there mid-September, given the ongoing construction at the rest of the site?
Oh, absolutely, yes. They'll be finishing the main boulevard in.
Okay.
And we've had other projects that are similar to this that are mixed use, where people would just traverse in. If construction starts on the north or south, they'll be fenced off and protected. And the building department here does a great job of making sure that there is separation between occupied units and units under construction.
You else have any questions or comments? All those in favor? Thank you. That's good. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you guys for waiting.
Yes,
Yeah,
thank
thanks
you.
for waiting.
So how many are going to rent? Who do we have up here? Who needs a place?
How many dogs you need?
He's gonna be using the bike to get there.
Actually, I know you can have dogs.
You can't have dogs. It's a breed restrictions that we have.
Good luck to you guys.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes.
And I'll get back to you on
Welcome
that.
to town.
It's a good point.
What did you want to keep?
So, Mr. Chairman, we can table the discussion on the 42 Summer Street development agreement. The only consideration is that Mr. McDonald will probably want to move forward. Like if you don't discuss it now, which is fine, he has a certain level of urgency, so if you don't talk about it now, he's going to want decisions potentially next time.
So Megan, was this already vetted by the council, this draft?
So my goal today was to bring it up to the board so that it could be discussed today, and then after town council finalizes it, it can come to the next meeting, and to ask the board to sign it at that point. But if you'd rather wait and discuss it at a future meeting, I'm totally comfortable.
But that's gonna delay the process a little longer, right, this step?
I don't think it's-
No?
Unless we prepare to make the decision at the next meeting.
Well,
then that
We
would be
can
the same.
receive the information prior to the next meeting, and if there's concerns, we can get to them before the next meeting via email.
Sure.
You know.
Yeah.
That's okay
We
by
have
me.
the most recent draft, and I'm working with town council to button up a few issues, but we can discuss it at the next meeting, no problem.
Hometown banners, we can table that one.
Yep. I'm doing 3 Ds on this.
Meeting dates, we can do next.
Yep, you can probably,
We just need to know our first meeting date.
I have July 2nd as the next meeting for
July
the
2nd?
chairman.
Sorry.
Good thing your daughter's here.
But,
So we're gonna move the town, I see the town meeting, we can set that, we don't have a problem with timing by setting that the next time, do we?
No,
We can set
because
that now.
I've been getting awareness to the various participants.
And we can do that right now. Motion to set the date, time, and place for the special town meeting as Monday, October 28th, 2019, at 7 o'clock PM, the Fowler School Auditorium. Do you have a second?
Second.
The last discussion, we did not set a date, right?
We did.
There wasn't
We did, it was
talked about it.
November
Tentative date, but we changed it.
Okay.
November
I just wanted to make sure we
Yes.
didn't have two motions out with two dates.
No, this is it.
That's a good point. Even if you did, you can
But this is
re-motion, so to
This
speak.
is the final date, right? This is, as of
Yes.
today.
Yes, as of right now.
All
I
right.
don't like giving like 90%, this is,
All right.
but I'm pretty sure this is
Okay.
it.
Yes, so November 18th
So-
goes away.
Yes, correct.
All right, so all those in favor of October 28th?
Who seconded that? I apologize.
You guys just.
Justine St. John. Did you, you willing to say today's Tuesday?
I think so.
Okay.
Is it still Tuesday?
For where we're at.
An hour and 9 minutes long.
Okay. So, Mr. Chairman, that my, you know, if you're moving on to the town administrator's report,
No, wait. All right, what,
so, I'm asking the selectmen to consider the recommended, hiring process for the DPW director, which is highlighted in one of the documents. And then I ask, and I should have done this earlier, but I just typed in a motion into the board docs if you see it now, which is similar to what was proposed for the assistant town administrator search. Motion to authorize the town administrator to recruit and negotiate a contract agreement for the position of the DPW director. But again, it's per my recommended process. And I can go over that now, Mr. Chairman, if you would like.
all right, so, hold on.
I apologize for the last second change with that.
Where is that?
So if you just type, if you click on
Oh, I see,
16A,
okay, we'll make a motion, all right. So I'll make a motion to authorize the town administrator to recruit and negotiate a contract agreement for the position of the Department of Public Works.
Yes.
I'll second that.
That doesn't make sense.
What?
It just says for the position of the Department of Public Works.
Because I forgot to type in director.
Director.
Of the
Yes.
Director of
The
Public Works.
Position of Director of Public Works Department.
Director of the Department of Public Works.
Okay,
Thank
so
you.
second
Thank
again
you.
on the new language. Does
Thank you.
anybody have any discussion on that one?
No, have at it.
Oh, okay, very good.
More power to you.
Very good. Very
All
good.
those in favor?
That was easy.
That's a new area.
All right.
All in favor.
You're all in favor.
Very good, Mr. Chairman, that's all I have.
All right, so I don't really have anything to add tonight.
Can you, by the way, bring us up to speed what happened with the visit from the Chinese school?
Thank you thank you so much. So, yesterday, representatives of the Beijing Royal School, who was the winning bid for 111 Patternell Road, which is the old Stratus building, they came to town and they met with myself, Megan Zamudo, Jack McKean from the Economic Development Committee, Bill Nemser, Tom Leonard, Keith Young, who was here this evening, and Rick Asman, the Building Commission. We wanted to hear from them what their vision was. My understanding was they'd already come to the town 4 years ago or so, but due to international considerations, they withdrew. Well, they're back, and they're excited, and they pitched a good plan, but now we have some more to do to make sure that we understand the implications of that vision on the town. And loose, sort of like big picture stuff, they want a school. They want it, that included both daycare and K through 12. And it would be offered to a range of students that includes both Chinese students, but as well as American from the area, particularly Maynard, as well as the surrounding towns and whatnot.
It's a day school too, right? Not
The day school.
Right,
So
so
there-
there's no dorms or anything?
No, there is. Oh, I'm sorry. There's both. I'm sorry.
Yeah,
I'm sorry. I apologize. So it's yes, it is dorms. Their plan is to have it be for international students as well, which would require some sort of dormitories. Which does means, I think, a pretty significant construction to the site. It's office buildings and it's fine, but
And how many? That's.
so they're thinking 300 to 500 students. Although that could be done in phases. So there's a certain amount of undeveloped land, and so Mr. Wang, who's the owner, who's pitching this, has big dreams, and he wants to do a phase of dormitories later. dormitory classrooms in the existing structure. That would require, according to his plans, which we have not yet seen, but according to his vision, he wants to do courtyards, so that there could be windows for the dormitories on the inside, as well as classrooms on the inside, having windows on the inside. He needs wider stairwells. He needs better and bigger elevators. So we've got his work cut out for him. And that's good that, we're willing to hear that and be able to give him the feedback. And I think it's great that he met with us so we can give him that early on and help him develop those plans. We have contacts with his engineering staff, his designer staff, but he's excited. And
Greg?
he does, but he only just told us this time only yesterday. So he hopes to open it by September of 2020. We told him we'll tell him if that's possible according to our procedures. I don't know yet.
One question. The last time those guys were here, because you know that there was another, they tried to reach out to us like 3 years ago,
Yeah, that's right.
and it fell apart. The understanding at that time was that it would be a taxable project.
Correct.
And that's important because, certain educational facilities are not taxable.
Correct.
So we would, correct me if I'm wrong, they still would be able to tax that property as commercial property?
Okay, so that we're doing research on. So what you're referring to is sometimes called the Dover Amendment, which allows, so it's, no, I'm sorry, I'm confusing. The Dover Amendment is the zoning provision. Correct. What you're saying is education institutions, religious institutions are generally not taxed, they're not taxed in America. But there's alternatives to that, could be paying a little bit of taxes and whatnot. But, it's a little more straightforward if it's considered like a for-profit institution than commercial, so to speak.
Yeah.
But we're researching all that.
Okay, and this is a for-profit institution.
Is that your understanding?
It's for profit, but it does look like it's education. So, I mean, there is it's a concern.
That was part of the discussion and concern the last time, was that we
It's
would
ours.
lose.
It's a concern for
We
us.
find out one question, because,
Yeah.
yes.
The other question is there anything we can do about that?
Well, if we can get
We may need to adjust
payments
some
in
of our
lieu,
bylaw,
Yeah, we're working with the assessor.
we can get payments in lieu of taxes that are equal to what we have in taxes,
As well, but I also pointed out other things. We have infrastructure concerns, and he said he understood that as well. I have concerns for affordability. I would like local students to be able to attend, and he said he understood. But it's very early on. It just closed
May 31st.
May 31st.
So from a tax assessment standpoint, is that property going to be assessed at the actual value and not at what they paid for?
Good question.
That is good. Yeah, that is a good question. I believe it will be taxed at the same value, not what they paid for it. I think. There's something. Yeah, there's something about the auction clause that doesn't make that's not a real sale for market value perspective.
It's only gonna go up because they're gonna do site improvements and everything else. It's gonna be assessed at a higher number if there's taxes.
but we've had that discussion before, where it
If there's taxes.
doesn't reflect.
No,
I mean, where improvements have been made and the increase doesn't go through.
Down.
It's not a religious school, correct?
No.
It's just a private educational institution. Okay.
So,
It was fine, Lincoln, I don't know.
it's good questions, and it's something that I encourage them to be very receptive, and they seem to be, of the questions of the public, of the various committees, and they seem to be on board. They're very excited.
Okay. Anybody have anything to?
No.
Motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Someone has a second.
Second.
All in favor? Our next meeting is July 2nd, by the way. Thank you all. Peace.
I didn't get to comment.
We didn't have comments.
Discuss it by Wendy's, so that I wasn't sure if I would want to see if the person being assigned
So you go to 11:01.
So now, I sent all the information to the board, so I just would want the next meeting.
I would not.
Well, I think it's
I would recommend